Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm really glad you're here. If you enjoy fun content and cool videos, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Let's jump right in. My name is John. When I was a kid, I lived in a quaint little town in Michigan with a group of friends whom I saw on a nightly basis. Our summer days were packed with adventure, sports, and all-around fun. However, things in that town just weren't right sometimes. This is the story of a wooded area just behind my house and what we found within them. My backyard was large, and behind us there was a relatively large wooded area. A hike through the woods from my backyard out to the other side, where a busy road cut through them, would take you about 10 minutes. Of course, if you walked one direction long enough, it would take you to a busy road, so there was never a threat of getting lost. But many rumors surrounded the woods. Tales mostly cooked up by the kids in our middle school. But that didn't make living right in front of them any easier. My backyard scared me at night, probably even more than my basement did. It wasn't always that way, though. I used to explore those woods fearlessly and eagerly, my sense of adventure always brightly burning. However, I started to see things back there. Little things that were probably just animals, but that's not where this story begins. It begins with the man in the hat. The man in the hat showed up on a night like any other. It was a hot summer night, and a few of us were out skateboarding in Jimmy's driveway. It was Jimmy, Rochelle, Claude, and I that night. Steve-O was grounded, and Sammy and Cody were playing a video game, claiming it was too humid out. So the four of us were skating outside, the night young. It was around 9 o'clock, and the sun was just about all the way down. The streetlights bestowed us with enough sight that we were still grinding Jimmy's new rail. We'd been skating since after dinner. When we started talking about the deep woods, the name assigned to the woods behind my house by the local kids. We started telling stories we'd heard at school, and I guess Rochelle was feeling pretty bold. "You guys want to go out in the woods?" Rochelle asked, a sly smile on her face. Truth was, it sounded like a blast. We were all really good at scaring each other and getting all hyped up. It was pretty much immediately unanimous. Claude always had to prove how much of a man he was to everyone, and Jimmy was always down if I was. So we helped Jimmy put his rails and ramps away before putting all of our boards in his garage, and headed for the deep woods. I opened my gate and closed it behind everyone. "John, go grab your flashlight," Jimmy said, turning to wait for me. I nodded and hurried back around the side of my house to the garage and made my way past the bikes to the old cabinet, where we kept everything. After finding the flashlight, I hurried back to find Claude and Rochelle already over the fence. Jimmy was waiting patiently near the fence for me. I jogged across the backyard, Jimmy, after spotting me, climbing the fence and hopping over. I tossed the flashlight over the fence and jammed my right foot into the chain-link fence, pulling myself up and over it, careful not to snag my clothes on the top where the wires twisted into Ys. I dropped down and Jimmy handed me the flashlight, which I promptly turned on and washed it over Rochelle and Claude, both of them with wild, excited eyes. This may come as a shock to some of you, but we had actually never done this before. Creeping through the deep woods at night, with all the rumors that floated around it, you'd have to be crazy to not be just a little bit scared. And we were only like 10, 11 years old at the time, so we believed a lot of stuff that we probably shouldn't have. I might not have been so scared if my parents were nonchalant about the woods, but even they expressed a bit of caution about them. The fact was, while none of us had brought it up before, I think we all secretly wanted to do this at some point. So here we were, the pall of darkness that smothered the world around us, only my flashlight to pierce through it. The four of us moved together deeper into the woods, occasionally jumping at the sudden movement of an animal. There were frequent shushes, and did you hear that? As floating around as we went. The flashlight traded hands often, each of us sticking close together. Claude, of course, had to be cool, and decided to put some distance between himself and the group, gaining a steady lead on us. I remember at this point Rochelle, whom held the flashlight, flicked it off for a second and screamed, which caused Claude to slam into us at full speed. He managed to take Jimmy and I down with him, Rochelle illuminating us with the light. We all laughed hysterically at him for a good couple of minutes before getting back to our feet. Admittedly, I jumped too, but nobody had to know that. Claude now sticking close to us, grumbling the whole way. We wandered around until we noticed headlights and the ground turned from soft soil to cracked pavement. "Yeah, I guess that's it," I said solemnly. I had never wished that the woods were larger until just now. We were having a great time. That's when she said it, "Why can't we keep going?" I turned around and looked across the road. It was true. The woods extended further on the other side of the road, and they were even thicker, more matured. The trees were higher and the depths darker. The tree line suddenly put me on edge. I didn't know why, but it did. "Yeah," Claude blurted out in agreement with Rochelle. Jimmy looked at me. Although Rochelle was holding the flashlight, the look on his face was clear. He was very uncertain about it. He looked towards the woods and then back at me. "I'm down if you are," he said, extending his fist for the secret handshake. I chuckled and shook my head before performing the secret handshake and turning towards the road. "All right," I stated firmly. "It's settled then." Claude bounded forward like a happy dog, the three of us hot on his heels as we ventured across the way. Into these new woods, the feel kind of changed. I went from happy and carefree to nervous and paranoid. The shift was sudden and unexplainable. We moved together through the brush, the grass much higher in these woods. "What if these are the deep woods?" Jimmy asked as we walked. "What if all the rumors are true and they're about these woods and not the ones back there?" I swallowed. I was more on edge than I would like to admit, and I really wished he hadn't put that thought in my head. "Oh, come on now," Claude piped up. "I made up some of those rumors myself." We laughed at this, which helped lighten this feeling a bit. A few minutes into wandering, I stopped. I was holding the flashlight at this point. "Guys, I think we should turn around," I said finally. "I don't know how deep these woods go, and I don't want us to get lost at night." Rochelle sighed. "That's viable," she responded. Thank God she agreed with me. I knew Jimmy would, and that would make for a majority vote. "Jimmy, you want to head back?" I asked just to be sure. "Yeah," he nodded. "It's late. Another time?" "All right, let's—" I stopped short, flashing my light on Claude. He had his back to us and appeared to be staring intently into the darkness. Claude, I repeated, shaking my light around. "Claude," Rochelle called out to him. "What's up, man?" Finally, he responded, though quietly. "Guys, do you see that?" he asked, his voice shaky in a manner that I wasn't used to hearing. "Doesn't that look like—" "A person?" He tilted his head lower. "Claude, come on, games are over," I insisted, not wanting a scare in these unfamiliar woods. "You see, in these woods we felt a lot smaller than when we were in the ones near my house. Suddenly it felt like there weren't enough of us, and something that I couldn't put my finger on made my hair stand on end." "Claude," I called. "Who has the fucking flashlight?" he asked frantically. "Please, for my own peace of mind, just shine it right there." He lifted his finger ahead. My head dropped and I sighed. "Fine," I stated, "if it'll get this out of your system." I lifted the light to the area he indicated and froze. It definitely did look like there was a man standing there. I was short for words. I held the flashlight steady as we all analyzed the figure. "I don't see it," Jimmy whispered as he took a couple of steps past me. I lifted my finger along his shoulder so he could see down my arm like the scope of a gun. My finger the sight. I handed him the flashlight. "Right there," I whispered, outlining the contours of the silhouette with my finger. "It looks like he's got like a bowler's hat on." Jimmy squinted his eyes as he tried to make it out. When finally, whether he did or didn't see it, he nodded. "Yeah, I think I see it." "Weird," Rochelle commented. "You ever stare at something in the dark long enough that it appears to move a little bit? Like you think you see something long enough that it starts to shift around in place, moving more and more the longer you stay fixated on it, and in the morning it was just a coat? Well, has the thing you're fixated on ever shot from its position at breakneck speed and leaped away into the night? No? It had never happened to me either until just that moment when all hell broke loose. It moved faster than any man could possibly move and put the fear of the devil right in us. There was screaming, commotion, the flashlight bouncing around, panic, dread, and an indomitable urge to escape the woods no matter what the cost. I hit a couple of trees as I ran, but they didn't deter me. I heard my friends running behind me, but to me at that moment it was that thing hot on my heels. I hit the pavement and nearly got run over by a car as I darted over the road, followed closely by the rest. I stopped at the tree line to turn around just in time to see Claude trample over me for the second time tonight, followed by Jimmy and Rochelle, neither of them with my flashlight. We stopped at the tree line, panicking and holding each other as we looked back across the road. "Holy shit, dude, holy shit. Oh my God, what was that? Did you see how fast it moved?" "Holy shit!" I dropped the flashlight. "I'm sorry." So many things said at the same time, all with Claude slewing obscenities over top of it all. We hurried back to my house in the dark, all huddled together. It was only a 10-minute walk, but it felt like we walked for hours. When we finally hit my fence, we hopped it and ran back to the safety of the streetlights in front of Jimmy's house. We all sort of just stood there trying to make sense of what we saw, but nobody could arrive to any conclusions. But we had a bigger problem than that. We dropped my flashlight out there. It was an expensive light that my dad expressly forbade me from using, though I did it all the time anyways. I would have to go back for it, but I never wanted to set foot out there again. I just decided that I would pretend I never touched the flashlight and act clueless as to how it went missing. We sat on the curb for the remaining 20 minutes of our night, discussing what we saw before we had to go home. We all saw different things, but there was one thing we could all agree on. It was man with a hat. Drizzle taps lightly on the leaves all around us. The smell of pine rich in the air as we creep through the undergrowth. My granddad and I run my tongue along my teeth, focusing. I raise the rifle a little higher. A Nosler, a way higher quality weapon than I should be using. The thing is wasted on me. I'm an appalling hunter. I'm not even sure if I agree with it, to be honest. Hunting, ethically speaking. My granddad and I eat basically everything we kill, and to be honest, I don't kill a whole lot. I send many of my shots deliberately wide. I just do this to hang out with him, really. He's a fascinating man, and the guy likes taking me out into the woods, so I just go along with it, it's fine. It's good quality time that I'm lucky to have. But we're stalking a pair of deer right now. Big things as well. I'm pretty sure the creatures know we're here, but you can get surprising close provided you don't actually give off any sign that you're trying to shoot them. Stay low, Robbie, he murmurs through the side of his mouth. Move to your right past the bush, then it's a clean shot. Take it when ready. I like my name. Named after the man beside me. As it happens, Robert. He being Robert the Fern, and me, of course. Robert the Second. I nod and creep into position. Taking careful aim as instructed. I see a thumbs up in the corner of my eye, and I shoot. I miss. The sound ricochets around the forest, and birds burst from a nearby tree, shooting up towards the sky. The deer wheel round in a panic and make to leave. Go damn it, my granddad mutters and raises up from behind the bush, bringing his rifle with him and firing off a quick shot. My ego is somewhat relieved by the fact that he misses too, and we both watch as the deer disappear into the undergrowth and shadow of the forest. The man lowers his weapon and looks at me. I do the same and give him a shrug. We hold eye contact for a second, then he breaks with a chuckle, shaking his head. Damn it, Robbie. Every time I think I've taught you something, you manage to pull off some magnificent blunder just like that. Hey, well, you know what they say. You shouldn't judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree. I ain't judging you on your tree climbing ability. You're my grandson. I'm judging you on your ability to swim, fishy. I point to the shattered branch my granddad caused when he fired his shot. I truly am learning from the best. Bastard, he snorts with a laugh, thumping me on the chest. Come on, let's track him. Plenty daylight left. We push around the bush and head through the little clearing, stepping over a fallen log and making to follow the route the deer both took. But my granddad suddenly stops and holds up his hand with his head cocked to the side. I pause likewise, waiting, holding my breath and listening intently. My ears hone in on the sound of rustling foliage and snapping twigs. It grows louder, heading towards us in the exact direction the deer were running from. Jesus, my granddad grunts. They're coming back this way. They'll have seen a... But he is cut off by the sudden emergence of the deer through the bushes ahead. Rushing right at us from the green, gloomy shade. Shit! I shout out loud in a panic. The deer make no attempt to run around us in the slightest and run instead directly towards our position. I raise the rifle and take rapid, shaky aim. Damn it, Steve, down. Granddad shouts, grabbing me by the sleeve and hauling me to the forest floor, back behind the log. Steve? The air escapes me as I crash with my granddad down to the ground, and the deer jump right over us. My granddad instantly takes position, cocking and aiming his own rifle over the top of the log, deathly focused. Something will have made him run like that. They'll have seen a wolf or a bear. A wolf, a bear? I'd be surprised to see either at this time of day. But as I said, something made them run. My granddad remains cool and composed, the barrel of the rifle fixed on the damaged woodland ahead and along the deer's path. I stick close, watching out in all directions in case we are approached from the side, gun cocked and heart pounding, but nothing comes. We wait for a tension-laden minute, then another, muscles aching with the stress of simply holding ourselves in preemptive positions. But as I said, nothing else comes towards us. My granddad cautiously gets to his feet. "Weird," he mutters. "We'd better move on out of here. Come on, stay alert, but let's go." I nod in reply, and together we make a swift but carefully exit from the little grove, heading back through the woods and retracing our steps. After what I hope is something of a safe distance, I ask my granddad a question. "Why'd you call me Steve back then, eh? When the deer were coming at me, you called me Steve. You said, 'Steve, get down.'" "Huh, is that so?" my granddad asks, scratching his chin. "I don't know. You know Steve, though, right? Old friend of mine. I swear I've mentioned him before, I consider." Yeah, maybe. Once or twice," Granddad shakes his head. "I've definitely talked about him more than that. You probably weren't listening." He sighs. "It was just the moment, I suppose. The way you were standing, the deer coming right at you, raising your gun. What would have happened if you'd shot one, eh? It would have gone right down and knocked you out with it. I don't know, it wasn't all that big. It was bigger than you're giving it credit for. And at that speed, would have flattened you. It's what I told Steve all those years ago. He did the exact same thing, the idiot. What's he up to these days?" My granddad does not reply. He only looks out into the depths of the forest. We're atop a high hill, and the trees give way to a view across a deep green valley. The sky is gray overhead. The man tuts and shakes his head. Steve isn't around much anymore. Oh, sorry. He's not dead, is he?" My granddad grimaces. "I don't know exactly." "You don't know? Look, just drop it, kid. A story for another day. Let's just get back to the campsite. Cook that rabbit we caught earlier." He pauses, putting out a hand, and I stop at once, following his line of sight. I hadn't even spotted it, but it chills my blood to see it now. Gives me the shivers even remembering. We stand only a few feet away from a deer. It's one of the same deer as before, I'm sure of it. Neither of us had spotted it because the thing is standing entirely still, like a statue, a taxidermy almost. "The hell?" Granddad whispers, staring at the creature in surprise. He squints and then leans over to me. "It's breathing, though only barely." Look down there at its chest. I do so, taking the spectacle in. The deer has one hooved foot placed against the trunk of a tree, which in itself is quite curious already. But the animal does not move, even slightly. It does not blink. "Hey," my granddad barks, then louder. "Hey!" He claps his hands, but the deer does not react. Then, in time with a sudden flurry of water from the rain-soaked leaves above us, the deer slowly turns its head, all the way around until it is staring at my granddad and myself, one eye on each. My stomach drops, though I am unsure as to why. The deer is... I don't know. Something is wrong. The thing must be sick, my granddad murmurs. "We'll take a different route back, go wide of this creature. We're too close already as it is." "Yeah," I mumble, and the two of us edge away and through the undergrowth, taking a new direction as the deer watches us go, deathly silent. I shiver as it at last passes out of sight, lost behind us to the watery green shadows of the forest. Later that night, after returning to camp and preparing and eating our catch, I bid my granddad good night and crawl into my tent. Zipping the flaps up after me, I fumble round in the near darkness for a while, my lamp casting intense black shadows out in all directions as I shift it from place to place, trying to work my way into my sleeping bag. It doesn't feel particularly cold at the moment, but the temperature has the potential to suddenly drop at any given minute, and I don't want to wake up frozen solid at 3 a.m. As it happens, I don't. I awaken at 3:15, not frozen, but slick with sweat. Roused from a dreamless slumber, my ears prick up at the sound of rustling and snuffling outside, right by my tent. I hold my breath and grit my teeth. It's this fear of the unknown that gets me. It's probably just a rabbit or a hare, but the possibility that it could be something larger, something more dangerous, is impossible to ignore. For some reason, my mind does not go to an image of a bear, or a mountain lion, or anything like that. It goes to the deer, frozen in place, eyes unblinking, head turning as it watches my granddad and I pass by. Something presses up against the tent right by my head. I wince and stare at the bulging material through the darkness. I try not to think about the fact that I am separated by the beasts of the forest by a pair of what are effectively thin, flimsy sheets of fabric. Just ignore it, I tell myself. Ignore it and it'll go away. I quietly roll over and scrunch up my eyes, determined to be a man, and to not get frightened by the presence of some raccoon or squirrel. The creature sniffles some more, rustling about in the grass, in the dark. My heart rate increases as I hear the thing pawing against the tent's outer lining. And then for a second it stops entirely, and to my horror I hear my granddad's voice. It's breathing though only, barely. The sentence comes crisp and sharp through the general murmur and backing breeze of the forest. The sentence is entirely devoid of cadence, as if read from a book by someone who has never known English. Look down there at its chest, says the voice. Fuck. Panicking now, I do not know what I am supposed to do. It's my granddad outside playing a prank on me. It has to be. It must be, because there is literally no other explanation that makes sense. Regardless of the fact that this is entirely out of character. Regardless of the fact that I have never heard the man speak in such a way, even in humor, in his entire life. He must be sleepwalking. That's it. My explosive heart rate cools just a little. That's it. It's the only possible explanation that makes sense. And if that's the case, then I can't just leave him to wander around outside. Despite my fear, I gently ease my way out of my sleeping bag. You might think me an idiot, but if my granddad is wandering around in the woods in a daze, he could get lost, or seriously hurt. So I push aside my irrational terror, and with a shaking hand I reach for the zip, pulling it open with a noise that is far too loud for comfort. Fuck it. In for a penny, in for a pound. I yank the zip open and then the next and push my head out into the night, the cool air washing across my face as I raise the lantern to cast away the darkness. What I see is nothing. I jump outside of the tent, staring, lifting the lantern as the light falls across the long grasses and the nearby trees. We're still on the ridge of the valley, but the valley itself is shrouded in darkness. A small section of visible moon illuminates the very tips of the trees in silver, but I am too preoccupied to properly appreciate the natural beauty for now. I pace around the tent in a circle and see no evidence of my grandfather. Granddad, I hiss out into the night, turning and raising the lantern up high. Still nothing. Something chirps softly from between the branches of the deep woods. I turn to face it with throat dry, but the trees give away no secrets. I cross the grass and crouch down by my granddad's tent. The zip remains closed. Granddad? I whispered to no response. I try again, a little louder. Granddad? I hear a groan and a grumble from inside. Huh? I hear him mutter, then, the hell? Granddad, are you good? Of course I'm good. What's the matter with you? All right. Nothing. See you tomorrow. He murmurs something under his breath, and I hear the rustle of his sleeping bag as he rolls over. I stand up straight and stare out into the night. For a second time, that chirping sound rings out from the branches, and I make a hasty return to my tent, zipping the thing up tight and secure, shivering as I try to force myself back to sleep. It takes a long time, and I do not recall drifting off. My dreams are disturbing and are largely comprised of the discovery that something crept into my tent, dream distorted and warped into an impossible size. My dream self scrambles around from place to place as a nightmare slithers and swims through the shadows like water. It is a welcome relief when I awake safe and sound, to the faded glare of tent-filtered, morning sunlight shining into my face. I mutter, sitting up straight and groggily rubbing my eyes. For a second or two, the reality of last night blurs into the dreams. But as I remember the truth, that bitterly familiar anxiety settles back in. I clamber out of the tent into the warming morning air to find my granddad washing his face in a pot of water. Mornin', he grunts. How you feel this morning? Not great, to be honest, I reply. You were sleepwalking last night, eh? Granddad glances up at me but continues with his routine. No, I don't sleepwalk. You were mumbling nonsense and bashing into my tent at like 3 a.m., I tell him. I came to check on you, but you must have just gone back to bed. My granddad pauses and looks right at me. So that did happen then. You were disturbing me. Thought I might have dreamt it. He stands up and scratches his jaw. Tell me exactly what happened. I relay the story and my granddad remains silent until its end. Slightly paled, he looks around at our surroundings and down into the valley. I fucking knew it, he mutters, almost imperceptibly. It's the same place. The exact same place? What? I ask him. What do you mean? I came here with Steve once. I knew I'd been here before. I thought I'd picked the location pretty randomly, but I guess my subconscious had other ideas. Granddad, I don't know what the hell you're talking about. He stares out over the valley and I follow his gaze. We watch as a small flock of dark birds flutters around in a circle above the trees. Again, and again, and again, around and around they go. He turns to look straight at me, his expression grim. Perhaps even frayed a little, and this unsettles me deeply. Nothing is supposed to scare that man. Pack up, Robbie. Make it good and be quick. We're out of here. In another atmosphere, I might have questioned him, but the vibe is clear. I do as he says at once, and in silence, we quickly pack away our gear, loading up our backpacks with constant furtive glances to the trees. The forest has dried somewhat since yesterday's rain, but the sky overhead is still a swirl of gray. We set out beneath its gloom, all trace of our modest campsite thoroughly erased. My granddad's pace is a little faster than normal. Bracken and pine needles are crunched underfoot as he strides through the woodlands. He clenches his rifle a little tighter, too. I break the tension. Granddad, what the hell is going on? What aren't you telling me? I was an idiot once before, Granddad replies, as a breeze whistles its way through the boughs of the trees. And I lost a good friend. I won't let the same thing happen to you. We push through the bushes and pass by a large pond surrounded by thick, tangled weeds. I glance over to the water. The water is a grim gray-green and covered in a curious floating moss. The surface is broken by the heads of 3 deer, standing perfectly still. The entirety of their bodies below the necks are submerged, and they stare at us as we pass them by. On another day, I might have found the sight quite comical, but right now I feel nothing but cold, biting fear. One of the deer rises up from the water, rippling it quietly, rearing up onto its hind legs, and my granddad grabs my sleeve and hauls me along. Don't stop moving. We're getting out of here. Just keep going, Robbie. Our steps become faster, our breathing a little more labored. The trees rush by, branches scratch at my arms and my face. We push out into a clearing, and my granddad skids to an immediate halt. What is it? I ask, panting. Something moves in the shadows of the trees, shifting between the branches at the clearing's opposite side. The hair at the back of my neck bristles, and I instinctively raise the rifle. The sounds of the birds and the breeze fade away, and the air itself seems to darken as the shifting shadow ahead draws closer. It is difficult, near impossible to make out its exact shape through the layers of branch and foliage. But I swear I can see a rough, vaguely humanoid silhouette amongst the shadows in the dark, green-blown blur. Did you come back for me, Robert? Whispers a voice. My muscles tense up in reaction to my name. Is it my name it speaks, or my granddad's? My granddad sucks some air in through his teeth. He begins to carefully sidestep his way around the clearing, and I copy his movements. You wouldn't leave me behind again, would you? The voice is not dissimilar to the one I heard last night. It is different, sure, but the cadence, or lack thereof, is much the same. My granddad raises the rifle, cocks it, but he does not fire. Keep going around, kid, he says to me. To the left, pass through that part of the clearing there, I'll be right behind you. I start to edge my way around the clearing, never taking my eye off the shadow in the trees just ahead. I'm trying so hard to focus on it, to understand what it is that I am seeing, but I can't. The very branches themselves seem to be moving, cracking and rippling in the shade. The figure takes a sudden step forward. Run! My granddad shouts, raising the rifle and firing a loud shot up into the air. Unprepared for such a sudden noise, my ears ring as I scramble and stumble through the forest, along a natural path of sorts between the trees, though I stumble to a halt when I realize my granddad is not behind me. He told me to run, but do I go back for him? I have to. It's a no-brainer. So I swivel around and prepare to charge back to the clearing when the man himself staggers out through the bushes towards me, face white as a sheet. Get that damn thing out of my face, you idiot. He grunts as she shoves away the barrel of my rifle, and together we race through the forest. My granddad dumps his backpack and I do likewise, leaving the equipment behind as we tear through the undergrowth, way back to where we parked the truck the other day. When at last we see it, waiting for us on the edge of a dirt track road, we throw ourselves inside, and my granddad stuffs in the key and turns it with a clank. The engine revving into life, the wheels spin and away we go, back through the wilds, down the long back roads of the woodlands. I summon the courage after a while, and once the air has cooled, to ask my granddad what he saw. What happened after he fired the rifle? thing tried to speak to me again. The deep woods, Robbie. I'm sorry for taking you there. They can screw with a man's mind, these places. Real bad. There was something there, though, wasn't there? Something real. Yes, I think so. Was it? I falter. Who was it, Granddad? A nightmare. That's all. Something that shouldn't exist by all the laws of nature. Its voice. Did you recognize the voice? You said you heard something outside your tent last night. Right, I nod. It sounded like me. Yeah, I reply, but it wasn't me, was it? No, I reply. No, it wasn't. Sometimes we hear voices. Don't mean they belong to anyone. So why didn't you shoot it? What? His hands flex and clench around the wheel. You fired the rifle, but you aimed up into the air, not at the shadow. Why did you do that? To this, my granddad has no answer. He only reaches briefly across to pat my shoulder, and as the clouds swirl overhead, we spend the rest of the long drive home in a contemplative silence. Silence, with the occasional glance to the thickets of trees that pass us by. Okay, it starts with a story I heard when I was younger. A dude goes into the forest. Manly dude, big, stoic, lumberjack type. Anyway, he goes into the woods near dawn. Says he's gonna hunt, cut some wood, scout the land. So he goes in and he's in there for a while, chopping and fishing and tracking. Nearby these woods is a schoolhouse, and just down the road is a small old town. It's summer, so the schoolhouse is empty save for the schoolmarm who's there tending to things that need looking after. Polishing the floors and furniture, trimming the weeds, washing the windows. Noon flies by and she's outside watering the flowers and vegetables and she hears a scream. But it's not high, no, it's low like a demon. She looks up, confused but unafraid, and sees something stumbling out of the tree line towards her. It's the lumberjack, but he looks different. Wild. His eyes have this 1,000-yard stare, and he's saying something in this sing-song sort of voice. Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head. The schoolmarm stands up and steps forward. The lumberjack is well known around town and well liked, and she's not afraid of him. She asks him what's wrong. He doesn't answer and walks right up to her, dragging his axe behind him. She places a hand on his arm and asks him again if he's all right. Again, he doesn't answer. He just starts laughing, and he takes that big old axe and swings it right at the schoolmarm, cutting her clean in two. They found him later, deep in the woods, dancing round and round with the severed top half torso of the schoolmarm, chanting that same old rhyme. Here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head. Spooky, right? Well, that's not the only story about the forests of MA, especially the Freetown Fall River State Forest. There are many stories. Stories about mysterious murders, satanic cults, otherworldly rituals, Native American cryptids, strange lights. Stories to tell around campfires or at sleepovers or on internet forums. The Bridgewater Triangle is there. It's an energy vortex. Or a portal to hell. Or a secret government laboratory. Or maybe all three. Yeah, there are a hell of a lot of stories, and you know what? I think some of them, maybe even most of them, are true. That maybe there is something out there. Living in those trees, something bad because my friend and I both saw something we can't explain. This is what happened. We were out in the middle of the day, trying to find a place to light up. If you're thinking that this may have somehow altered our experience, you'd be wrong since we never got the chance to actually smoke and were stone cold sober the whole time. Anyway, picture us in the middle of rural Massachusetts, surrounded by trees and overgrowth and green. You have never been this close to nature. The woods absolutely surround you, and the terrain is vast and hilly and strewn with lakes and trees. Lots and lots and lots of trees. And they're always watching, listening, waiting. If you ask me, the whole place is full of evil. An ancient sort of evil. The trees know, and they've seen shit. Bad shit. It's easy to ignore the stories about these forests when you're high on cell phone service and the bright lights and loud noises of civilization. But once you're out there in the trees, you start to remember, and you start to feel all that evil. So we're out in the middle of the woods, and my friend Ethan is packing one beside me, and I'm looking around and it's quiet. Really, really quiet. Can't even hear any birds or planes in the sky. And it feels weird. Creepy. Bad. Suddenly, without saying a word, I look at Ethan and he looks at me, and we silently agree that something terrifying is watching us from behind the trees and start walking. I don't know what it was, but at that moment, we both felt a presence of something evil behind us. There's a crunching noise, then another, like someone or something is following us. But the footsteps sound heavy like a lumberjack's. We get to a clearing and there's a loud crash like a tree falling. We both turn. I know we should have ran, but we didn't. We turned and faced the thing that's following us. Ethan's freaking out beside me, whimpering, and I'm staring at the spot the noise is coming from. The bushes under some trees near the edge of the clearing are shaking like something's in them. And then something jumps out. A rabbit. A normal-looking rabbit. It has sleek, black fur and a bright pink nose that twitches at us. Ethan starts laughing and I start laughing. Then choking, coughing, wiping tears away, Ethan gets out a, "What's up, Doc?" And the rabbit, well, it fucking stands up on its hind legs, looks right at us and grins. Like human grins, all the teeth showing, the corners of the mouth tipped up. Ethan stops laughing and blinks. He's confused. I do too, I am too. And the rabbit, it takes a step forward on its hind legs like a goddamn human. Dumbfounded, Ethan looks at me and I look at him and then we look back at the rabbit. It's still looking at us, walking towards us like a tiny human. And we watch as it opens its mouth and says in a hideously mocking tone, "What's up, Doc?" Ethan yells, stumbles, and falls hard on his ass. The rabbit throws its head back and starts cackling. I help Ethan up and we turn and run and run and run and don't stop until we're back inside his car. I've never run so fast in my entire life. As we're running, we can hear the rabbit behind us laughing and laughing. But it's lower now. Real low. Like a demon. And it's taunting us, saying things in a language I didn't and don't understand. Backwards English, maybe. Or Latin, Tibetan. I have no idea how we escaped. Maybe it let us escape. Either way, we hauled ass out of there and absolutely refused to ever go back. I don't know what to make of it. I still have nightmares about it. And Ethan doesn't want to discuss it anymore, says it gives him bad juju, whatever that means. To be fair, it's probably best left forgotten. Both of us do everything we can to avoid the forests now. And Ethan's even getting ready to move down to the southwest. But I don't know. Living in fear sucks and I want to know what it was. A demon? A ghost? Nature spirit? Failed experiment? Fairy? Trickster? Am I in danger marked? Forever haunted? Will that thing follow Ethan down to the desert? Or can it only exist in forests? Should I move too? And what else is out there? Hiding in the darkness, in the shadows, in the deepest recesses of what unexplored land is left in the world. I don't know. I just don't know. What do you think? Forests really are strange, aren't they? Miles and miles of trees. Sometimes so secluded you feel like you may be the only person on Earth while in one. Easy to get lost in. Forests creep a lot of people out, myself included. However, about a week ago I discovered something I never could have imagined deep in the woods behind my house. I live on a 7.5-acre plot of land, in front of a massive forest that goes on for miles, something quite common for northern Michigan. Though I've lived here for a while, I haven't gone very far into the woods. As someone that grew up in a large town, I've found the forest to be rather unsettling. The property I live on is only a few miles from the nearest town, but the town is very small. And in Michigan, the change from an urban environment to the wilderness can happen quite fast. The forest behind my house generally consists of evergreen trees and the occasional plot of hardwood trees. For a ways, the forest isn't very secluded. However, beyond where my property ends, at the power lines, it becomes very deep, very broad, and you feel hundreds of miles from civilization, although you are only about 3 miles from town and less than a mile from people's houses. I decided to go as far as I could into the forest and figured I may see something interesting. It was 10 a.m. and I figured I could spend the day in the wilderness, something I rarely ever do. I grabbed my pack of cigarettes, a lighter, my phone, a flashlight, and a candy bar. I'm not exactly an outdoorsman, so I was a bit nervous. There are bobcats and bears in the area, and I kind of just hoped I wouldn't come across one. I was not expecting to find what I did, however, and the idea that it was there, a few miles behind my house, deep in the woods, makes me shudder at the thought of it, but I'm getting ahead of myself. As I exited my house, I realized it was a bit cold and windy. I shrugged it off and began walking back. It was a cloudy, dreary day, and the bleak, grayish overtone the environment had really didn't make me any more comfortable with wandering into a massive forest, but I pressed on. Within a few minutes, I had finally entered the woods. It was rather dark thanks to the damn trees and the overcast skies, and the wind was not as harsh, but it was still loud and caused the branches of all the trees to sway. "Wow, thanks a lot, weather," I said out loud, declaring my irritation. I know it seems I was being way too paranoid about a freaking forest, and at the time I thought the same. Now I know it was some kind of warning. My instincts knew there was something back in those woods I didn't want to see, but at the time I figured it was just paranoia. After about 10 minutes or so of making my way through a maze of trees, bushes, logs, and ferns, I finally made it to the power lines. I stopped and lit a cigarette. In both directions, the power lines turned back towards the road, only letting me see a couple 100 yards in each direction. Behind me was my property, my forest, somewhat dense but familiar, and in front of me was an extremely dense forest, much darker and more unknown than the 5 acres I had just traversed to get to where I was. I smoked the rest of my cigarette and pressed on. I continued my walk for about an hour and a half before spotting something entirely unexpected. Deep in the forest, miles from anything, surrounded by trees so thick it looked like it could be 7 in the evening, was a house. A very old house. I stopped and stared at it. "Oh, come on," I yelled, hoping any nearby animals would know I was there and go away. The sight of the house filled me with dread. It was very old, run down, and covered in moss. All the windows appeared broken and the front door was gone. I felt a sense of anxiety looking at it, but figured, there's no way anyone lives here. I worked myself up to go inside, and grabbed my flashlight and turned it on. The house appeared to be from the early 50s and had only a downstairs floor, and apparently a basement. Upon entering, I was overwhelmed by the smell: mold, mildew, must, and dirt. The walls and floors were mossy or moldy. I looked around. I was in a living room. There was a disgusting moldy couch, a broken coffee table, and a very old moldy cracked TV from the 50s. I was fascinated. Everything was rotted and moldy, and the smell was overwhelming. I walked into the next room. It was a kitchen. This is where things get weird. The counters were cluttered with what looked like dirty dishes, with remnants of what was once food on them. The fridge was an old 50s-style rounded fridge that was dark yellow and caked in dust. The broken kitchen window let some light into the room and aired the room out a bit. I looked at the kitchen table. Plates with half-century-old rotten remnants of food were sitting on the table, as if the residents would return any time to finish their meals. I was completely freaked the fuck out at this point. I looked through the cupboards. They were filled with non-perishable canned foods that were very faded and hard to read. There were some jars that I'm assuming held food in the past, but the food was black and nasty now. I opened the fridge. It was filled with nasty maggot-ridden food and some very old beer. I slammed it shut and the fridge door broke off. I was a bit creeped out, but fascinated at the same time. I checked out the next area past the kitchen. It was a hallway, in the same state of disrepair as the rest of the house. There were 3 doors in the hallway. One of them was locked, and it appeared to be the basement, since there were a couple steps leading down to the door. It had several locks, and I decided there was no way in hell I was going down there. I proceeded to the next doorway, the bathroom. It was a standard 50s bathroom, rotted all to hell with 50-year-old rotted toilet paper next to the smashed-up moldy toilet. The mirror was broken and the bathtub was filthy, moldy, and rusted. I left the bathroom and proceeded to the next room. It was a bedroom and was rotted to hell, much like the other rooms. There were 2 small beds and a bunch of very old moldy stuffed animals in one corner and rusted toy cars in the other. There was an old beat-up dresser against the wall in between the toys and a small broken window in between the beds. I walked up to the closet and looked inside. It was filled with rotted old boxes and some rotted old clothes. I left the bedroom and proceeded to the final room. As I opened the door, it fell out of the doorway and broke in half in the floor. I shined my light into the room. I could see a rotted vanity with brown, blotchy stains on the broken mirror. I got a sense of dread, but moved on into the room. I turned and looked at the bed, and my heart jumped, and I screamed out loud. There was a human skeleton on the bed. The clothes were rotted, and the skull was completely smashed into pieces. And I saw a gun on the floor nearby. Then I looked at the closet. In front of the closet were 2 smaller skeletons with rotted clothes and smashed skulls, much like the first. I was absolutely terrified, but had to see what was in the closet. I walked over and looked in and nearly shit myself. It was another skeleton. It was broken in half, and it appeared that the person had hanged himself. His clothes were rotted, and his skeleton had broken off at the bottom of the vertebrate. His hip bone and leg bones were on the floor below him. I was petrified with fear and managed to back out from the room. I turned and was about to run out of the house when I heard banging at the basement door. My heart was beating 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I was petrified with fear again. Then I heard a man's voice scream in my ear, "Get the fuck out, no! Get out, get out, get out, get out, get out!" I jumped and then I ran out of the house, nearly tripping several times. I turned around and looked and saw a vague silhouette of a man standing in the doorway. I had enough. I sprinted faster than I ever did in my life and kept sprinting until I got back to my house. I opened the door and slammed it shut, locked it and collapsed. I sat on the floor in front of my door for 10 minutes before getting up and sitting on the couch. I was freaked out and decided to watch some TV. I decided I wasn't going past the power lines again if I even went that far the woods again, which I haven't. I was tempted to call the police, but I decided not to. I hate the cops and don't want them meddling in my business, asking me what I was doing and telling me I was trespassing. It was obvious the apparent murder-suicide happened decades ago, and I figured I'd leave it be. As I sit here typing this, I can't help but think just a few miles away, deep in the woods, is a place where a horrendous crime took place decades ago, and that no one in this area is aware it exists. I have always believed in ghosts to some extent, but now I'm positive they exist. A thought just hit me. Why was there knocking from the basement if the skeletons were in the bedroom? Have you guys ever seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Many of you probably have, but for those who haven't, it's your run-of-the-mill slasher horror flick made in the 1970s, I think. Hold on, let me check. Yeah, that's right, 1974. It's considered one of the best horror films ever made. When I first watched it, it seemed to really hit home for me, much more than it did for my brothers when we were younger. I was 11 at the time, and we had sneaked a copy of it into our house from our friend who lent it to us at the time. Now, I would have to say one of my biggest fears is being kidnapped and being surrounded by inbred, batshit crazy people, so needless to say, when I saw this, there were more than a few sleepless nights with my light on. But did you know it was based on a true story? Just the thought that there were real, actual lunatics like that in the world just made my stomach churn. But what are the chances that you would ever find yourself in a situation like that? Let me tell you all. And this post will serve as a warning to anyone who thinks that the United States doesn't still have its fair share of crazies. Listen to me right now. There are people out there who live in the woods. There are many of them, and I would bet that there are some that live in your state. And they are possibly the most dangerous and batshit crazy people you will ever encounter. They are not to be tampered with. If they find you on their turf and God forbid capture you, then you might as well be better dead. When groups of people begin to isolate themselves for a long time, many of whom participate in interbreeding, they become something much more different than a human. Their primal instincts and violent tendencies become amplified, as well as their intelligence and empathy becoming non-existent. So no sleep? I would like to tell you about my most terrifying experience and my first and hopefully last encounter with these people. I will not give any real names or locations on where this occurred, as I fear some of you might get the bright idea of trying to find this place for yourself. So it started over the summer. A few of my friends and I decided we wanted to go on a camping trip. Weird, right? 4 dudes going into the wilderness with no girls and sleeping in tents? Well, we used to do this when we were kids, so it was kind of a nostalgic trip. We hadn't noticed anything when we were teenagers. It would always be an annual night of fun in the outdoors. We would drink, tell stories, laugh, cry, the whole deal. We live relatively close to the woods, so our parents would let us go up, but only once a year. So anyway, back on topic. It had been 5 or 6 years since we last went up there. We all parted our separate ways when we went to college. We would occasionally all go on Facebook to talk about our lives. So we all finished college, got jobs, and I decided to call them up. I managed to get a hold of 2 friends, and they were both up for it. My other friend moved all the way out to Florida, and he was busy with work and shit, so he couldn't come back to our home state. We brought a bunch of gear and supplies, as well as a couple of other things like beer and food. We were ready to relive our high school days as best friends. We got onto the trail at about 5 p.m. We hiked on the trail, and I swear it was like we were back in high school. We talked about everything happening in our lives. We were laughing so hard at the college stories we were practically choking. We finally got to our campgrounds at about 8 p.m. We were all set up by 9, and we lit up the fire and cracked open the beer. We told stories for about 3 hours, and we decided to call it a night. Now, there are many rumors in my area about these people in our area who have been isolated for some time now. We had never seen any sign of them when we were younger, so we had no reason to ever be worried about them. I don't know if they relocated or moved or something, but basically what I'm trying to say is they should have never been there. They should have never known we were there. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked at my phone. It was around 2:30 in the morning, and for some reason I couldn't sleep. For about an hour I just laid in the tent just staring at nothing. That's when I heard it. That's when I heard them. It sounded like a pack of wolves or something walking about our camping grounds. I was already losing my shit at this point. But when I really shit myself was when I realized it didn't sound like animal breathing. The way the steps were moving and the breathing patterns were just too human, that there was no way they were animals. I stayed absolutely silent. There was no noise for a brief period, and for a moment I thought I was just imagining it. Then I heard whispering. All I could make out was, "After we gut them fuckers, who's gonna get their livers?" At this point, my fight or flight instincts kicked in. It was officially go time. I decided that there were too many of them. I swear to God, now that I'm remembering it, there must have been a dozen of them at least. I nudged my buddy to wake up. He just turned around and looked at me with eyes that told me, "What the actual fuck?" I put my finger over my mouth and motioned with my hand that we needed to go. He nudged the other friend, and we could clearly hear them talking now. We all stayed absolutely still for 30 seconds, and I took out my Swiss Army knife. I took out my phone for my flash, and I was ready to bolt out there. Then I heard one of them scream, "Them fuckers are awake!" I immediately jumped out of my tent, and I got one good look at all of them with my flash. They were fucking disgusting creatures. Their teeth were all deformed, and their heads were gigantic. Their ears were huge and perked up like dogs. They were all much bigger than us. I would assume they were all around 6'4". We left everything. We completely bolted out of the area as fast as we could. I could hear them all chasing after us for a couple of minutes. My adrenaline was at maximum levels, and I wanted nothing more than to get the fuck out of the woods. I could hear them cackling as they were trying to track us down. After 2 full hours of running downhill, we finally jumped in the car and called the police. We told them everything that happened. Here's what the cops said in response. "You must have had an encounter with the nickname for group of people. They happen frequently in this area. Just don't go back there." What the fuck? I explained to him that they were about to skin us alive and we left all our shit there. All he could say was, "I'm sorry for your loss, sir, but I would advise you to not go back." I was in complete shock. I have done a lot of research on the group of people the officer told us about after that incident. Some of the stories are horrifying. Many cases of missing men, women, and children, all leading back to this one group of people. The police refuse to infringe this group of people in fear of retaliation. There needs to be stop to this. A lot of nights I keep lying awake in bed thinking about what would have happened had I fallen asleep. I still think about it to this day. It has become very difficult for me to fall asleep after that, knowing that sleep could have let my guard down and gotten me killed. I don't know if you guys have any experiences like this. Feel free to discuss it in the comments. I just needed to get this off my chest. I haven't been the same since then, and I feel like this might add some closure. Have a nice day, everyone. In the early days of February, just before my senior year, I was prompted by my father to undertake a rite of passage, as he called it. I was to be left alone to fend for myself in a section of Tennessee's Cherokee National Forest for 3 days and 2 nights. I was against the trip from the beginning. Sure, I liked hunting and camping, but this was extreme, too extreme for my tastes. But it was tradition, passed down from father to son in my family for generations. Who was I to break tradition? So against my reservations, and against the feeling that this was a stupid idea, I packed up my backpack, grabbed my .30-06 bolt-action rifle, and climbed into the cab of my dad's pickup. It was a long drive, broken only by stilted attempts at conversation, and the heater going full blast as the tires rolled past endless concrete. I was a little pissed that my dad was basically forcing this on me, and our uneasy silence only made the hours feel like days. We only stopped once at a gas station about 10 miles from our cabin. The stench of unleaded and a cheap convenience store hamburger would be the last remnants of civilization I'd see for the next 3 days. I mechanically swallowed my burger and slurped down the watery Coke filled with too much ice as we turned off the highway and got on the rural back roads. It was 15 miles of dirt to my dad's cabin that his grandfather had left him, which would in turn be left to me. It was tradition after all, but I wouldn't be getting the luxury of a cabin, no. We were parking the truck, and my father was driving me up deeper into the woods on a 4-wheeler to a random, undisclosed point. I would then have 3 days to find my way back. If I succeeded, I'd become a man in my dad's eyes, And we'd also be getting a new swimming pool for the summer. It was bribery, but I would be going into my senior year in August, and having a big pool would cement my popularity. It was vain, and I was doing this for mostly selfish reasons, but I also wanted to make my dad proud. I stepped out of the toasted truck to the calm, frigid forest air. The cabin was a small 2-story log affair, worn from age but obviously well-maintained. A new wooden wraparound porch had been built last summer and was in need of staining that we'd never gotten around to. But otherwise, the cabin was pristine. It was a tremendously peaceful place, far removed from the troubles of civilization, and I felt like I was intruding on hallowed ground. I brushed off the shiver that clawed down my spine and buttoned my long coat to my neck. Immediately, most of the chill went away, and I shook off my unease. I didn't want to admit it, but a part of me was looking forward to the trip. Some primal part of me relished the opportunity to put all the survival skills I'd been taught over the years to the test. Before I could take a step to the cabin, my dad came around the front of the truck and put his hand. "Thomas, hand me your bag," he demanded in a curt, no-nonsense tone. My dad and I looked so much alike in the face, the same unruly dark hair and deep-set eyes, but I could never hope to measure up to his terrifying drill sergeant voice. As he told me to hand him my backpack, I did so without question, and he immediately went inside, telling me to wait on the porch. I marched across the wood and sat in the rocking chair while my dad bustled around inside. Pots and pans clanged, and metal scraped against metal as he worked, breaking the sounds of the forest around me. For half an hour, my dad busied himself with my bag before the screen door creaked as he ambled back outside. "I loaded everything you'll need for 3 days in the bag. You have a couple days of food, but it's only for an emergency. I also added a flare gun for an actual emergency." Dad kept his voice rough and only used that tone with me when he wanted me to really pay attention to him. He had a good reason. As fun and full of tradition as this experience would be for me, I was still spending several nights alone in the woods and in the untamed wilderness. Anything could happen. He handed me back the bag, and it was stuffed full. A lot had been added to it, so much that strings strained against the nylon fabric. I hefted it onto my shoulder, and though it was much heavier than before, it wasn't cumbersome or unwieldy. I could carry it all day, and I didn't think it would bother me. After he handed me the pack, we unloaded the 4-wheeler from the back of his truck, and we set off up the small walking trail next to the house. From memory, the path went on for dozens of miles and followed the stream as it snaked through the wilderness. We rode until the dirt road ended and humanity fell away to the deep woods. The ride got bumpy as we wound around trees and over small rocks, and for a minute, I was afraid of hazards. My dad was an experienced outdoorsman, though, and knew these woods well. A few hours later, we'd apparently reached the destination. It was a small clearing nestled under a copse. The remains of a previous campsite, long since put out, rested in the center of the dirt surrounded by a circle of rocks. "I was up here scouting a couple weeks ago, so I know the route I'd take to get back," he said cheekily. "Be careful, son, and call me if there's an emergency. I'm only a few hours away, and I should be able to see the flare if there's trouble." "Yeah, because I'll be able to get a signal out here," I replied, holding up my now useless phone. "Well, there's always the flare gun, but I'm confident you'll be fine, and besides, the flare's really only there if you decide to give up," he said. Laughing, with a parting wave, he departed, rolling back down the mountain and leaving me stranded in the woods for 3 days. The first thing I did was take inventory and catalog my belongings. I undid the pack and carefully emptied its contents onto the ground. I had a pair of long johns, some extra socks and underwear, a box of matches, a hunting knife and miniature shovel, a Ziploc bag filled with a blend of spices, a canteen of water, 2 days of vacuum-sealed rations and water pouches, and the flare gun. Along with my hammock and blanket, I had everything I needed to make camp and survive if my hunting skills proved to be lacking. I had over 30 miles of wilderness to hack through before I hit the main roads and could circle back to the cabin on the main road. Dad told me it should take me at least 2 days, 3 if I didn't get lucky with my hunts. I had a few hours to kill before nightfall, and I wanted to get some miles in and find my bearings. The best bet, I thought, would be to hike along the stream until it ended. It was somewhat close to the trail, but not on it, as that would be cheating, but it would give me an excellent landmark to keep me oriented. So with mild hesitation, I packed up and set off through the woods. It had been a good couple months since I'd last been in the woods, and I'd never been this deep in them. It was quiet, only disturbed by the rustling of trees and the occasional scuffle of an animal nearby as I trudged over rough ground and rocks. Staying near or on the trail would have defeated the purpose of the experience. So I stayed off it as much as I could and only traveled through the woods themselves. Of course, it slowed my progress considerably, and I only managed to walk about 2 miles before I started thinking about stopping. I would have to hunt before it got dark if I didn't want to go hungry, and I only had an hour or two before the light fell enough to make hunting impossible. After searching around for about 10 minutes, I found a good spot to set up camp for the evening, and I dropped my bag and grabbed my rifle, chambered a cartridge, and double-checked the safety. My game was rabbit since I didn't have the tools needed to string up and gut a deer. I set off and crept through the brush, looking for signs of a nearby den. Rabbits are most active at dawn or dusk, so it was the perfect time to hunt them. Less than 5 minutes later, I found signs of rabbit trails in the underbrush a few hundred yards from camp. I leaned against the tree, just waiting. The rabbit I wanted appeared half an hour later, hopping out of the brush without a care in the world. It was a plump eastern cottontail. It stopped and sniffed, giving me my opening. The crack of my rifle pierced the air and the cottontail dropped dead. I'd hit my mark, taking it in the neck so as to not spoil any of the meat. It was a decent-sized rabbit, more than enough for dinner. I bagged it and went back to camp. Light was fading as I reached my campsite, which made fire priority 1. I grabbed the mini shovel and dug a small pit in the center of camp, spreading the loose dirt around the perimeter. I picked up a bundle of sticks and kindling, just clearing the site, which gave me ample dead wood to burn. So I piled a bundle in the ground with some dead leaves and twigs and got a nice fire going. When I had light to work by, I cleaned the rabbit, making sure to not perforate the bowels and remove the organs and skin. I walked away from camp and buried the offal and hid in a small hole next to a tree. When the meat was cleaned, I rubbed some spices into the meat to remove some of the taste of game and skewered it with a stick I'd sharpened. While the meat cooked over a makeshift spit, I tied my hammock to the only 2 trees close enough for it to work. By the time my bed was ready, I had to turn the meat and get it ready to eat. A sprinkle of seasoning garnished the piping hot meat, and I dug in when it was fully cooked. I wasn't the best cook and didn't have the right tools and ingredients, so the meat was a little dry and bland but filled me up nicely, and I washed it down with a swig from my canteen. I even had leftovers. I wrapped them up in cloth and sat them by the fire, ready to be eaten for breakfast in the morning. With nothing else to do, for the evening and night had fallen an hour ago, I decided to turn in for the evening and get an early start in the morning. I had many miles to cover, and I would have to hunt again at some point the next day for dinner. I nodded off, listening to the sounds of the forest as they lulled me into a deep sleep. In the morning, I woke up refreshed from one of the best night's sleep I'd ever had and was eager to take. On the day, I was in such a good mood that it took me a few minutes to realize something was off. In the middle of packing up my hammock and gathering my supplies, I couldn't help but notice that the leftover rabbit was missing from next to the fire. I searched around for it in vain, thinking the wind might have caught it and blown it away from the camp. But there was nothing. I chalked it up to a wild animal, but that unsettled me. Deers didn't often eat meat, and I didn't think a deer would get anywhere near my campsite. The smoke from the embers of the fire would have been enough to keep most animals away. Black bears were common enough in the forest, but they should still be hibernating during this time of year. Right now, there wasn't anything larger than a deer in these woods, so unless it was a coyote, it had to have been a deer. But there were no tracks anywhere around my campsite, so no answers came to me. I'd packed up camp and went to relieve myself when I found something that confused and terrified the hell out of me. I went to piss by the tree where I buried the offal of the rabbit last night, and right where I'd buried them was a hole. It was rough, with long claw marks gouged deep into the dirt as if something had ripped into the ground to get what I'd buried. I'd buried them deep enough to not attract the scent of wild animals, and I'd never seen claw marks like the ones next to the tree. I didn't know what to make of them. Wild animals weren't that smart, and they were skittish by nature. No animal would risk getting close to a human unless they were starving, and no human had claws like the ones I'd found. Without hesitation, I grabbed my rifle and racked a cartridge. The air was calm and birds sang through the treetops. It was a lovely morning, and I was petrified. I walked the camp in a circle, spreading out, searching for any tracks or signs. The only ones I'd found were some deer tracks about 100 yards from camp that were at least a day old. There was nothing else even remotely resembling the marks I'd found. There was nothing for me to find, and even though I was freaked out, I still had to hike back to civilization. As the miles wore on, I began to rationalize the experience, thinking it to be nothing more than a hungry animal looking for food and brave enough to sneak into my camp. I just hadn't buried the offal deep enough and some critter had smelled it. That's all it was. As the day wore on, there was nothing to differentiate my delusions. The woods were normal, no ominous warnings or foreboding feelings, just nature alive and well in the midday sun. I managed to bag another rabbit, purely on coincidence as it scampered out of the tree line. I snapped off a shot and my aim was lucky. I'd taken it in the head, which left little of its skull behind, but it left the meat ripe for the taking. I'd made good time through the woods, so I stopped and quickly cleaned the rabbit, leaving the offal and skin where they lay. If something wanted to eat them, then let it. After the rabbit was clean, I wrapped the meat in cloth and stowed it away. I was hungry from the hike, and the fact that my breakfast had been stolen that morning, but I still wanted to put some more miles under my boots before it got dark. I wanted to be far away from my campsite, just in case. As the sunlight faded from the canopy and my aching feet demanded a break, I found a spot to set up camp. It was a small campsite, nestled up against a rocky mound that stretched skyward for a couple dozen feet, with a slanted shelf near the top. I felt comfortable having my back to the wall, and a brace of trees next to the rock ensured I could set up my hammock. I readied the campsite, built a roaring fire twice as large as the one last night just to scare away any nearby animals, and cooked the rabbit to perfection. I was ravenous and scarfed down the meat with gusto. Despite my hunger, there were still plenty of leftovers again, but this time, I was careful to stow the meat inside my pack, which I kept next to my hammock. Exhaustion had worn me down from the many miles I'd walked that day, and I was eager to get some sleep. I laid my head on my pillow and was out like a light. The stillness woke me, like a veil of silence had been draped over the woods. Not a single sound rose from the forest floor, other than the rustling of the leaves in the wind, not even crickets. Animals instinctively go quiet in the presence of predators, but this was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. I lay in my hammock, straining my ears to listen to any sound I could. There was nothing but the wind. The fire had died out, leaving only coals that sparked every time a stiff breeze rolled in. The moon was fat in the sky and gave me ample light to see by as I stared up at the trees. For some reason, I was terrified to get up and look around. My rifle was next to me, resting just by head against the tree. I could grab it in seconds, and there was a round in the chamber, but I couldn't reach for my gun. Couldn't do anything other than stare straight ahead and try not to move an inch, because I realized something was watching me. It started as a tickle of paranoia on the back of my neck as my hairs stood on end, but it grew to fear as sweat beaded on my forehead. There was a presence in the woods, its eyes were on me, and it was angry. Pure, unadulterated malice oozed from just beyond my sight. Something was watching me, and it hated me. It's a hard-to-describe feeling, the anger that was directed toward me. But I knew what it was on a primal level, something instinctual, right alongside the fear of being alone in the dark. I knew that feeling, too. The presence persisted for a few minutes and didn't fade. Sweat poured down my neck as I fought to stay still. Eventually, the silence and fear got to me, and I had to do something. I couldn't take it anymore and leapt from the hammock, hitting the ground hard. I ignored the pain radiating from my arms and scrambled for my rifle, scanning all around me, trying to find whatever it was. As I spun around, I saw it, perched on the rocks above me. For a single split second, a flash of neon blue eyes stared back at me from an angular, too pale body before it slunk out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest and my head felt fuzzy, like ants crawling over my brain. It became hard to breathe and I fought to keep from passing out. I was scared out of my mind because whatever that thing had been wasn't human, and it wasn't an animal. It was a monster. I didn't sleep that night. I built up the fire and huddled around it, clutching my rifle till morning. Screw tradition and screw these woods. I was heading back to the cabin at first light and I wasn't stopping till I reached it. Nothing else happened through the night. But as dawn broke over the mountains, my nerves were shot to hell and my eyes ached with the strain of keeping them open. I stumbled to my feet, kicked out the fire, and slung my backpack over my shoulder. I left the hammock tied where it was and set off towards the stream. I was going to follow it to the trail, and I'd be back at the cabin well before nightfall. It took an hour of walking, stumbling over uneven terrain till I found the stream, and from there I found the worn trail. I followed it for hours as the sun rose high in the sky. I was so tired, but the fear of death and that monster were the only things that kept me putting one foot in front of the other. I was hungry, thirsty, and beyond everything else, utterly exhausted. But I kept pushing forward no matter how slow and tired I was. I still had the rabbit tied up in my pack, but I couldn't stop and eat. As the day wore on, I began to recognize parts of the terrain, and I knew I was close to the cabin. I was so elated that I didn't pay attention to where I was walking and rolled my ankle on a small rock that jutted out from the side of the trail. I lost my balance and careened off and hit my head on a nearby tree branch. Everything went black. I awoke to dusk. I'd been out for a couple of hours, whether from the blow to the head or the exhaustion. Whichever it was, I was still in the woods, and night was coming quickly. The monsters never appeared during the daytime, so I thought I was safe in the light. But light was running out, and I still had a mile or so till I reached the cabin. I picked myself off the ground and dusted the dirt off. I grabbed my rifle, checked that it was still loaded, and I flicked the safety off. My finger stood a millimeter from the trigger, and I kept my head on a swivel as I hastily jogged the trail back to the cabin. Relief swept through me when I saw the wraparound porch come into view. I nearly sagged to my knees as I reached the cabin just as the last of the orange bled from the purple skyline. I had made it back. "Dad," I yelled as I ran up on the porch. "Dad, we gotta go!" I ran around to the front door and stood stock still as my blood ran cold. The door to the cabin was open, and my dad was lying halfway inside and halfway on the porch. He'd been mauled. His body was nothing but ribbons and scraps of flesh that only half resembled what a human should look like. I stared in silence, my mind not comprehending what I was seeing. He'd been wearing the red and black checked flannel shirt I'd gotten him for his birthday. It was the only way I could tell it was my dad. His face had been ripped from his skull. 2 white bone peeked out from his empty eye sockets. The stench was ungodly. A mixture of fresh meat and the iron tang of blood filled the air. I clutched at my stomach and hurled bile on the wooden floorboards, sinking to my knees as my throat burned raw as I heaved my guts out. Absolute panic gripped my sanity and took it for a joyride as I tried and failed to come to terms with the fact that my father was dead, had been ripped to pieces by whatever was outside stalking me in the dark. I had to leave, had to get as far away from that place as I could, or else I'd be next. I screamed wordlessly and backed away from the porch. I turned and ran to the truck. It was my only avenue of escape, and I had to hurry. Night had already fallen. I scrambled the driver's side of the pickup and yanked on the handle hard enough to break it, but it held and opened the door after a second of sticking. I climbed into the cab and threw down the visor, where my dad usually kept the keys, but they weren't there. The only other place they could be was in the pocket of my dad's jeans, and I would have to get them. Steeling myself for the inevitable, I clutched my rifle tight and exited the vehicle. I knew I had to be fast. Knew I needed to already be far away from the woods, but my feet wouldn't carry me any further. I stared at the mutilated remains of my father and tried not to throw up again or break down in madness. "Come on. You can do this. Just put one foot in front of the other. Do it now," my rational mind screamed at me, trying to override the panic I felt at that moment. I stepped forward an inch at a time, and before I knew it, I was back, staring down at my dad. I breathed through my mouth, not being able to stomach the smell again, and crouched, careful of the sticky and drying blood. I squinted through my eyelashes and patted my dad's pants. The keys were in his left pocket, so as quickly as I could, I stepped to the side and dug through them. My hands clutched around the metal key and I yanked my prize free, nearly stumbling from the force. With the key in my hand, I bolted from the porch back to the truck. I just wish I'd been faster. As I reached the open cab, flesh thudded against wood and I turned, searching for the sound. Movement from above me drew my gaze, and I finally got a good look at what had been chasing me through these godforsaken woods. It was on the roof of the cabin, clinging to the side of the slanted roof with ease. The monster was humanoid, but it crawled on all fours like an animal. Its skin was pale white like paper and thick and rough, leathery almost. But what marked it as being something inhuman was its head. It bore ethereal blue eyes that lit up the night, and a large angular face that tapered to a point near its mouth. Its mouth which opened, revealing thousands of minuscule, needle-point silver teeth in rows stretching down its throat. The creature's eyes never left mine, and glinted with malicious intelligence. It upturned its too many teeth into a gruesome smile. I didn't think, didn't panic, I just reacted. I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet whizzed past its head and took it in the shoulder. Bright white blood spurted from the wound and splashed across the roof of the cabin to drip down the shingles. It let out a high-pitched shriek of pain and recoiled from the shock. It slid down the roof and into the tree line faster than I could line up a second shot. When it broke from my line of sight, I sprinted to the truck, tossed in my bag and rifle, and slid into the driver's seat. Thankfully, the truck started on the first try and the engine roared to life. I flicked on the high beams, threw the truck in reverse, and spun around as fast as I could. The shadows of the forest writhed in chaos as I sped down the trail, going too fast for comfort, but my mind and nerves were shot. It was all I could do not to floor the pedal and speed away as quickly as I could. I was driving recklessly, taking curves too sharply, and doing everything in my power not to fishtail into a tree when a thud landed on the roof of the truck, crumpling the aging metal. I screeched, panicked, and jerked the wheel, trying to throw it off. I spun the wheel too much and clipped an overgrown tree in the process. I tried to overcorrect myself, but only ended up slamming the side of the truck into the tree line. The truck crunched to a halt, the passenger side crumpling like a bent can as tree branches snapped, sounding wooden gunshots through the forest. Whatever was on the truck was flung to the side as we crashed. It flew off the hood and hit a tree further into the forest. Bones cracked, and when it fell to the dirt, it left a smear of white blood across the bark. I tried to start the truck again, but it just groaned and wouldn't turn over. With a half growl, half groan, the creature picked its bleeding body off the ground and glared at me, its neon eyes glowing even brighter as it shrieked and crawled toward me. I grabbed my rifle and left the truck. I could follow the monster by its eyes alone, and I perched my rifle on the hood of the truck and took aim. It was slow as it crept toward me, giving me plenty of time to line up the perfect shot. I had my crosshairs centered right between its eyes, and I rested my finger on the trigger, a split second away from firing. The creature let out another scream, much higher in pitch than the others, and my body jerked on its own accord. My hands spasmed and I squeezed the trigger. My shot went wide, flying off into the woods and thudding into an old tree. That had been my last bullet. My rifle only held 4 shots and I hadn't brought any extra ammo. I squeezed the trigger again and again. Terror gripped me as it slunk along the earth, leaving a milk-white trail of blood behind it. I threw the gun at it and ran for the truck, for the knife in my bag. I wasn't going to let it get me. I wasn't going to end up as food, as a mutilated corpse like my dad. I was going to kill it or myself if that failed. I wouldn't let it eat me. The thing was on me before I reached the cab. It slammed into the side of the door, pinning me as I was halfway in the door. I lunged for my bag as the monster opened its jaws wide and bit through the metal door like it was cardboard. It ripped a chunk free and spat it on the ground as it eyed me with rage and hunger. My hand closed around my bag and I tore the strings, grabbing the knife that was at the top of the bag. I slid it from its sheath as the creature was poised to bite. I jammed the knife to the hilt in the side of its face, just below its glowing blue eye. It reared back in pain, sending a mind-pounding shriek of pain splitting through my psyche. It stopped my heartbeat for a second as it jumped away from the truck and tried to dislodge the knife stuck in its skull. I thought then that I'd landed a lucky blow and it was going to leave, that I'd be able to get back in the truck and escape the forest. But more howls joined the first, and 2 more of the monsters slunk from out of the shadows. This is where I die. It was the only thought running through my head. I couldn't run from them, couldn't fight them. I was going to die, but I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I grabbed my torn bag and I ran into the woods as fast as I could. I was desperate to escape, but the howls and thuds of too many legs padding through the dirt behind me told me I wouldn't escape. They were close at my heels, and the only thing that saved my life that night was gravity and my own clumsiness. I tripped on a branch and tumbled to the ground as one of them sailed over me, mouth wide as the 1,000 needles closed around empty air. It hit the ground a few feet away and turned, eyeing me up. I backpedaled but hit a tree as it lunged a second time. With nothing else in my hands, I brought my bag up as it clamped down, throwing me to the forest floor. Its teeth closed around my bag, ripping the nylon to shreds, but my mini shovel got lodged in its throat and it couldn't close its mouth all the way. Clothing and food poured out of its jaws and I scrambled out from under it. My hand hit something plastic as I crawled away from the creature, and even in the dark of the woods, I couldn't fail to make out the bright orange handle of the flare gun. It was a long shot, but it was the last weapon I had, and I clung to it as I stood up and ran away. I didn't get far as the monster chomped through the metal shovel like it was a toothpick and spat out the remains of my backpack. It howled in rage and ran for me. Knowing I only had one shot, I stopped running, dropped to my knees, and fired. Daylight split the night as my eyesight was obliterated by the burning red flare as it streaked through the air and hit the monster in the face. Like it had been doused in kerosene, the creature went up in a gulf of flames. Its flesh sizzled and popped like grease in a pan as it cracked and blackened in seconds. It howled in agony, screaming such a high-pitched sound that my ears bled, and I fell to my knees as my consciousness waned. By the time I rose to my feet and wiped the blood from my ears, it was dead. It was now nothing but a charred carcass burning under the crackling fire. The flare still burned, illuminating the night, and showing me the other two creatures that had crept up on us. I was out of weapons and out of hope, but they stayed back, just at the tree line, watching me and the flaming carcass of their friend. Fire was their weakness, it seemed, and even though I had no more flares, I bluffed them. It was the most reckless thing I could have done, but I had no other options left. I raised the empty flare gun and they flinched. They took a step back and stayed low to the ground like they were ready to bolt. I pressed my luck and took a step forward. They turned and ran as fast as they could, deeper into the forest, howling as they did so. As soon as they were out of sight, I ran myself. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, not caring about the scrapes and scratches from the branches whipping at my face. I only cared about my own survival. I hit the road leading to the highway and ran for hours. There were too many miles between me and the highway, but I didn't care. I just kept running. By the time I hit the pavement, it was daybreak, and I knew I could stop running, but I kept on. Because I had nothing else but the run. If I stopped, it would mean accepting what just happened, and I didn't think my mind would survive. I ran until I hit the gas station. We'd stopped it only 3 days ago, what felt like a lifetime ago. The gas station attendant took one look at me out of breath with bloody, torn clothing and called the police. He was kind enough to give me all the water I wanted while we waited for the police. I drank it in silence while I sat huddled in on myself, trying to calm my racing heart and not to think. It took the cops nearly an hour to arrive from the nearest town, and when they did, I finally had to tell them my story. They didn't believe me, because of course they wouldn't. I sounded insane, raving about monsters with glowing blue eyes and white blood like a madman. However, the officer was patient and kind, taking down my statement word for word, despite the skepticism on his face. I told them where to find the cabin, the truck, everything. They found it all right where I told them it would be. But there was no sign of the creature I'd killed, not even ashes. My dad's body was also gone. The only sign it had been there at all were the bloodstains. The police chalked it up to a wild animal attack, attributing my story to be just that, a story by a scared teenager who witnessed an animal kill his father. The reporters, the kids at school, hell, even my mother, they didn't believe me. But I know the truth. I'm not crazy. There's something evil in that forest, whatever it was, whatever those fucking nightmares were. There's more than one of them, and they burn just fine. If you camp out in the Tennessee forest at night, be careful, learn from my story. And for the love of God, carry a fire source. My hometown of Cedar Creek, Colorado had a woman who everyone loved to hate. Her name was Ms. Gatlin, and she was both my elementary school's janitor and the scapegoat for all unfortunate events around our town. The Cedar Creek elderly despised her for having a son out of wedlock, and the town parents scorned her for giving said son too much freedom. A parenting style which had supposedly led to his death at the hands of our town's eponymous river. As for the children of Cedar Creek, we didn't care at all about social conventions or parental negligence, but we all agreed that Ms. Gatlin was an ugly lady, and that was enough to warrant our cruelty. My best friend at the time was a curly-haired menace to society named Isaac who, by 5th grade, had established himself as a ringleader amongst the neighborhood boys. He did his best to inconvenience Ms. Gatlin, though his pranks did little to rattle her. If we spread rumors about her poor hygiene just within her earshot, Ms. Gatlin didn't bat an eye. If we released bugs inside her janitorial closet, she'd calmly sweep them outside. If we stuffed rotten food inside her locker, she'd clean it out quietly and without complaint. Our usual tricks never worked on Ms. Gatlin, and all of us unimaginative kids were stumped by how to best a woman whose job was to clean up messes of all kinds. In my last year of primary school, Hanukkah fell a week and a half before we were dismissed for winter break. All of the Jewish children thoroughly enjoyed showing off their gifts to the rest of us, who had to wait an eternity for our presents. Thanks to Kim Possible, Spy Kids, and Totally Spies, every kid in Cedar Creek was obsessed with espionage, so Isaac's gift of a spy tech kit for kids made him even more popular than usual. Most of the kit was cheap plastic junk, but there was a small spy radio that seemed very well manufactured. It consisted of an earpiece and a button-sized microphone that was supposedly capable of transmitting audio up to a radius of 5 miles. Isaac, myself, and the rest of our crew spent most of the week before winter break running around town and testing the capabilities of the device. The audio quality was surprisingly good, although the earpiece and microphone could only be separated for about 3 miles before the sounds became too distorted to understand. It was a novel concept for a few days, but after a while we grew bored of playing walkie-talkie. Isaac wanted to use it for its intended purpose, surveillance, and he had the perfect target in mind. On the last day before winter break, Isaac and I glued the button-sized device to the back of an old brooch we had found in his sister's jewelry box. We covered it up with a strip of velvet and then glued on the pin and catch, and by the time we were done, you couldn't tell anything was amiss. We put it in a small white box, which we put in my backpack for later. We determined that I should be the one to deliver it, given Isaac's reputation as a prankster. After school, I found Ms. Gatlin in the staff break room. She barely looked at me as I walked into the room. I noticed along the far wall of the break room a wall of cubbies, each one marked with the name of a staff member. All of them were filled with gifts and letters, presumably from parents or other employees at the school. All of them, that is, except one. "You can't be in here, kid," Ms. Gatlin said to me in her gruff voice. I know. I swung my backpack onto my stomach and fished around for the box. It had gotten a little banged up in my bag, but I figured she wouldn't really care. I procured it and held it out to her. "But I wanted to give you this before the break." She stopped packing up, turning fully toward me. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring suspiciously at the box. Setting her bag down, she took a few steps forward and grabbed the box out of my hand. She gave it a slight rattle and then opened it slowly. When she saw the brooch, she gingerly took it out of the box and turned it around in her hand. Then she paused again, looking between the glittering fake emerald and me. "It's not new, sorry. It used to be my mom's," I told her, going off of the script Isaac and I had conceived to add more authenticity to the handoff. "She doesn't wear it anymore, but I thought you might like it." Ms. Gatlin kept staring at me, her expression unreadable. I half expected her to chuck it into the garbage bin in the corner of the room. But to my relief, she gave me a single nod. "Thank you," she said, and pinned the brooch onto her cardigan carefully, like it was a precious gem and not some cheap hunk of plastic. I gave her a smile that she did not return, and then she shooed me away. Isaac was waiting for me in the woods outside school. I flashed him a thumbs up, and he slapped my back twice in congratulations. He pulled the earpiece out of his backpack and held it between us. I put my ear next to the speaker and was delighted when I could hear movement. The sound was slightly more muffled now by the velvet backing, but the audio quality was still really good. We heard the sound of snow crunching under Ms. Gatlin's feet as she walked herself through the woods home. We listened giddily for a few minutes, then raced back to my house to celebrate our success with hot chocolate. Since we had the attention span of 2 10-year-old boys, we forgot about our triumph until just a few minutes before Isaac's mom came to pick him up. When I remembered, I pulled out the earpiece, which we had decided would live at my house since it was closer to Ms. Gatlin's, and listened. More than last year, but not as much as the year before last. "What do you think about it? Do you like it? Can you feel it?" "I see. Me personally, I've loved it since I was a little girl. It falls so prettily." "What the heck is she saying?" Isaac asked me as if I had any clue. The better question, in my mind at least, was who the heck was she talking to? She had no kids or husband and didn't have any friends as far as I knew. "I don't know," I said. "She's talking about snow, I think." Though the question, "Can you feel it?" seemed an odd thing to ask anyone. We sat there listening to her talk for 5 minutes straight. I'd never heard Ms. Gatlin talk that much in my life, even though I'd seen her most days since I was only 5 years old. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure what we had expected, but it certainly wasn't a monologue of that length. We strained our ears, listening for another voice, but heard nothing. Maybe she's schizophrenic, Isaac volunteered. I had no idea what that was, but I trusted his authority. His mom showed up to take him home, and I turned the speaker off to walk him outside. After that, every once in a while, I would turn the speaker on and listen. It seemed that no matter the time, be it early in the morning or late at night, Miss Gatlin was always talking. She talked about all kinds of things, everything from clothing to stocks to the weather to politics. Sometimes she prayed, talking so quickly and quietly that I could only make out one out of every 5 or so words. She apologized often and spoke constantly of a promise. Sometimes when I turned on the speaker, all I heard were sobs, and sometimes the conversations were so strange that I couldn't make heads or tails of them. A young woman smiled at me today at the grocery market. Isn't that just the sweetest thing? I felt like it's been so long since someone smiled at me like that. Yes, I know she was just doing her job. Probably doesn't even know my name, haha. Oh, how hard this has been, how lonesome. But I am so very close to the finish line. I won't break my promise now. A few days before we returned to school, Isaac and I made the trek over to her house in an attempt to figure out who she was speaking to. I had seen her house a few times before, and each time I was taken aback by how small it was. Isolated and weathered, her home stood at the edge of the southern woodlands on a large plot of land, off of a street with very little through traffic. I remember standing on the side of the road with Isaac, staring at the shack-like house, which must have only had room for a bedroom, a bathroom, and maybe a tiny kitchen. There's no way anyone else lives there, Isaac said after a while of standing and staring. We were too far away to peer in through the windows, but we were also too afraid to venture any closer. She's either a witch or she's just some sad, ugly old lady who went crazy from having no friends. Isaac got bored quickly, so we left not too long after that. After we had made our way partway down the street, something compelled me to turn around and give the house a final look. When I did, I saw the unmistakable shape of Miss Gatlin standing on the porch staring in our direction. I turned away and grabbed a hold of Isaac's arm. She's watching us, I whispered to him. His eyes grew wide. Shit, he said. Should we run? No, that'll look suspicious. Let's just keep walking. We walked until we were out of eyeshot, and then we ran all the way home. I'm not quite sure what spooked us so badly, but for some reason, even when I was back in the safety of my own home, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes burrowing into my back. And soon they'll all be coming back. It's hard seeing them sometimes, knowing my Oliver was among them once. Sometimes I think I see him. At least it'll get easier soon, thanks to you. By the time we went back to school, my friends had grown bored of the spy gear. I volunteered to return Isaac's speaker, but he said it was practically useless now since we couldn't retrieve the microphone. Surprisingly, Ms. Gatlin continued to wear the brooch every day. It was always pinned to her non-work clothes, so the only time she was unbugged, as Isaac put it, was when she was in her janitorial outfit at my school. Seeing her guard the brooch so carefully made me feel kind of bad. Was that the only gift she had gotten for Christmas? Was it the only gift she had gotten in the past decade? Maybe she wasn't a witch or crazy. Maybe she was just lonely and had learned to cope by talking to herself. Months passed. Isaac and company, finally coming to terms with the fact that they would never get the rise they were looking for out of Ms. Gatlin, moved on to terrorizing a curmudgeonly old man who lived across from Cedar Creek Elementary and was always yelling at kids for one reason or another. I was happy for Ms. Gatlin. One day in March, I found her sitting on a bench at the edge of campus during lunch. I took a seat next to her, not expecting much. She took one look at me, then fixed her gaze back at the sad-looking sandwich in her hand. What do you want? She asked without looking at me. Nothing. Just wanted to sit here. She picked at the sandwich. We're not friends, kid. I know. You don't have any friends. That's right, she nodded. Maybe one day, though, I said, and to my surprise, she laughed. I didn't even realize she was capable of laughing. She looked at me properly for the first time in our brief conversation, and I noticed that she was smiling. It was an unpracticed smile, but a genuine one. Yeah, she said, maybe one day. Ms. Gatlin packed up and headed back to the school building after that. She left a bag of mini Oreos on the bench next to me. I think she did it on purpose. I grew accustomed to checking up on her every now and then. listening to her conversations with herself. Sometimes it almost felt like she was talking to me. Looking back on it now, I realize what a little villain I was and what an immense invasion of privacy I was committing. I wish that I could take it back now, especially considering what happened next. Friday, May 17th marked the 10-year anniversary of Oliver Gatlin's death. I kept an eye on Ms. Gatlin throughout the day, but she didn't seem any more dejected than usual. Maybe things were finally looking up for her. In any case, although I hadn't checked in on her for a while, I decided that evening to see how she was doing. My parents were gone for the weekend, and I was only allowed to stay at home alone if I stayed inside the whole time, so I had nothing better to do. Not long after sunset, as I lounged on the floor of my bedroom, I turned on the earpiece. Ms. Gatlin was talking to herself, as always, but there was something strange about her tone. She sounded more excited than ever. Almost there. Almost there. Almost there. She repeated those two words over and over until at exactly 11:44 p.m., she let out a sound that I only understood years later to be a cry of triumph. "It is done. It is done, Dark Angel. Thank you, thank you. 10 years of solitude, and it was worth every second. Now, Angel, bring him back to me." What was she on about now? Were those song lyrics or something? I strained my ears, listening for another person out of habit, but of course there was only Ms. Gatlin's voice. After a moment, her cries of happiness faded, her voice taking on a confused tone. "What do you mean?" "No, that can't be true." I kept my promise. I followed every rule. I let no one in, kept no companions, made no friends. I kept my wish a secret, as you told me. My angel, I sat up slowly, the building terror in her voice putting me on edge even from miles away. And then, she asked a question that still haunts me to this day. "What do you mean I had an audience?" There was a moment of silence, and then the surefire sound of the velvet backing of the brooch being ripped away. I could hear her breath, sharper and clearer than ever before, as she repeated a single word. "No. No. No, 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 no." She withdrew from the microphone, her rapid breaths replaced by what sounded like her front door being thrown open with a bang. There was no more noise from the microphone. I remember standing up in my bedroom, not quite understanding what had just happened and not quite knowing what to do next. Something told me that I should go downstairs and make sure that the doors were locked. So I told myself to man up and forced myself down the stairs to the dark first floor. I made my way around the whole house, checking the doors and windows. Once I was done, I just stood there. Somehow I knew she was coming, and that there was nothing I could do to stop it. I thought I was hearing the wind, but as it grew louder, I realized I was hearing wailing. I heard it long before I saw her. That gut-wrenching cry, that sound that I had previously heard only pale imitations of in movies where a mother loses her child. Standing in the darkness of my living room, I watched her sprint from the tree line towards my house. Her mouth was wide open, her eyes glazed over, and her body dressed in a white nightgown. She looked and sounded like something out of my worst night terrors. I dropped to the floor and crawled away from the window, taking cover behind a couch. "Wah!" she howled, her mournful voice rising and falling as she ascended the steps to my front porch and slammed her fist against the door.
Wait!
I needed to get to the phone, but the house phone was right next to the widow, and I was petrified. She hit the door so hard I was afraid that the hinges would give way. "How could you do this to me?" I clamped a hand over my mouth. She couldn't possibly know for certain that I was in the house, could she? The origin of the wailing shifted as she rounded the wraparound porch, the heavy knocks of her fists against the door giving way to the thudding of her shoes on the wooden porch floor. I stuck my head around the couch and saw no one at the front window, but when I looked to the side window, I saw a face hovering inches from the glass. I screamed at the top of my lungs as her fist came into contact with the glass, shattering it. I was so horrified by the rain of blood-speckled glass that I almost missed the sight of a shotgun scabbard strapped to her torso. Certain I was about to die, I screamed at her to go away, to leave me alone, and she screamed right back at me, asking me questions that I didn't understand. Dogs had begun to bark at the commotion, and my next-door neighbor's porch light turned on. "Please just go away," I shrieked as I finally found my footing and raced to the phone. I grabbed it from its holder, starting to type 911 as I decided whether or not I should risk running to the neighbor's house. When I looked at the broken window, though, she was nowhere to be seen. The wailing had rescinded, growing fainter and fainter until I couldn't hear her at all. I stood there dumbly until the sound faded entirely, my hand shaking. She was gone, I was sure of it. Should I still call emergency services? After a moment, I heard another fainter sound, and recognized the Statusy audio immediately as a transmission from Isaac's spy gear. I raced upstairs, still clutching the phone, and grabbed the speaker from the floor where I had dropped it. I pressed it against my ear, listening to the faint sound of a familiar voice. "I hope this was worth it, kid," it said, calmly and coldly. "I hope you and your friends can laugh about this." I heard a bang, and then I heard nothing at all. It took 2 weeks for the police to find her body. Her final resting place was deep in the woods, under a thick shroud of junipers not far from the banks of Cedar Creek. As her face was mutilated beyond recognition, her body was identified by the shotgun lying beside her. They say that, although she was covered in enough blood to entice every animal within a 3-mile radius, her corpse was untouched by the beasts. Even the insects seemed hesitant to feed, and the fungi slow to grow upon her body, as though even the lowliest creatures feared contamination by the lonely woman in the woods. They did not find a brooch on her person. I read once that in antiquity, people were advised to avoid the forests and wilds. These territories were treacherous and often unexplored or unmarked. Those who would enter would not always return, and so myths began to spread that terrible things lurked within these lands. Most people were content with letting the untamed lands remain so. As time went on, though, most of the world moved on to fearing other things. I, however, have come to fear the woods much like our ancestors did. My family moved to the small wooded town of Sunderland, Vermont when I was 8. My parents wanted someplace quiet and not so crowded, something in contrast to a place like Boston. I didn't particularly want to move, but I hated Boston anyway, so I didn't argue. The place my parents bought was a rustic 2-story, with a backyard that rested against the western edge of a forest. For the first 7 years I lived in Sunderland, things were normal. The woods and I had a healthy relationship. I'd hang out within viewing range of the house, and I would never go in after dark. That changed when I was a junior in high school. That's when my nightmare began. It was a late summer afternoon, and the sky was a dull gray. My friend Chris and I went into the woods behind my house to smoke a joint he bought off a kid in our calculus class for $30. It was a fatty, but Chris definitely got ripped off. "We don't need to go far. I just don't want my parents to be able to see us," I told Chris. "You've never explored deeper than this?" he asked. "A couple times with my mom and dad, but I've never really been interested otherwise." "Then it's time for you to go on an adventure," he said. "And I've got the perfect solution to your fear of getting lost." Chris stopped and dropped his backpack at his feet. He rummaged around for a moment and pulled out a can of red spray paint. "We can make a ring on the trees we pass so we don't get lost." "Why are you even carrying that around?" I asked. "Never know when you might want to mark your territory." "You're an idiot, dude," I laughed. We continued walking deeper into the forest, Chris marking the way. I let him walk ahead of me as we walked further on ground made soft by years of decay. After a few minutes, he slowed down abruptly before hurrying over to something and saying, "Hey, Heather, come take a look at this." "What's up?" I asked as I approached his side. "Check this hole out." Just a few feet in front of Chris was a pit. It was probably 3 to 4 meters in diameter. It looked like someone had used a giant post hole digger to lift a perfect cylinder out of the forest floor. Rope-like vines hung around the edges, but the walls of the hole were strangely smooth. "How deep do you think it is?" I heard Chris light the joint. "Good enough spot," he mumbled to himself. "No idea, let's throw some stuff in it." I kicked a rock in and waited to hear it collide with something, but there was only silence. Chris threw in a couple branches as I stood close to the edge, watching them fall into the black. Silence again. "Freaky." Chris exhaled smoke and passed me the joint. "Thanks," I said as I took a deep hit and peered into the pit. It was almost mesmerizing, though the longer I stared, the more nervous I felt. I felt as if something beyond the darkness was staring back at me. I took another hit and passed the joint. "I don't like this hole," I said. "My head hurts looking into it." We continued to hand the joint back and forth as we stared into the pit. "What do you think's down there?" Chris asked. "Probably dirt and lots of bugs." "I hate bugs." Chris kicked a bunch of dirt into the hole. "I don't know, they can be kinda cool, except spiders." "Yeah, fuck spiders. Also, fuck this pit. Let's go home," Chris said as he tossed the still smoking roach into the pit. We watched the light get swallowed by the darkness that filled the hole. Man, that's deep, I whispered before I turned to follow Chris, who was walking back. As we made our way to my house, I felt like I had seen or done something I wasn't meant to. I revisited the site in my nightmares that evening. In my dream, I was staring up at myself and Chris from within the pit. When Chris tossed the roach into the pit, I watched it fall in slow motion for what seemed like an eternity. When the embered tip finally went out, there was an inhuman cry that carved into my eardrums like a hot awl. My vision cannonballed out of the pit and swerved through the trees in the forest until it stopped just outside my bedroom window, where I saw myself sleeping. I immediately woke up and looked out of my bedroom window, my eyes searching wildly for something new or out of place. But there was nothing there. I sat there hyperventilating for several seconds before I started to calm down. The next day at school, I hurried over to Chris during our shared free period in the back of the library. "Hey man, how's it going?" He didn't respond. "Yo, you good?" I put my hand on his shoulder and he jolted upright. "Shit, you scared the fuck out of me," he said sleepily, rubbing his eyes. "Sorry, I was taking a nap. I didn't get much sleep last night." Did he have the same dream? I thought to myself. I didn't ask. I just wanted it to be a weird nightmare. I sat down across from him at the table and pulled my laptop out. "So what's good?" I asked. "Not much, but listen to this. After I went home last night, I couldn't stop thinking about the hole." "It was weird, right?" Chris answered. "Yeah, very," I replied. So I decided to do some Googling about really deep pits and came across this thing called Mel's Hole. Some guy called this paranormal radio show in the 90s and talked about this hole. He found that was so deep that even an 80,000-foot fishing line didn't reach the bottom. The thing might be a hoax, but regardless, it got me thinking, how does the hole like the one we found exist? No idea. But there's something not right about it. And on a side note, can we stop calling it the hole? It's kind of bothering me referring to it like that. How about Heather's hole? It's in your backyard, after all. Fuck you, that's gross. I laughed. Something else. How about the circle? It was a perfect circle, after all. That's better. So, should we go back and check it out later? Chris asked. Was he not afraid of that thing like I was? I don't know, Chris. The circle makes me really anxious. So what are we supposed to do? Forget about it? Chris said with a hint of frustration. I don't know what I want to do. But Chris cut me off. You had a dream too, didn't you? I stared into his eyes. They twitched. Yeah, the falling roach and then something coming out of the circle, right? Yeah, I saw it too. I sat in silence for a moment. You want to go back after that? We had the same dream, man. That means something. Nothing's happened. For all we know, we were just scared by it and had really similar dreams. Chris had a point. But what if something does happen? Chris scratched his cheek. We'll go from there. Fine, I muttered. Anyways, did you do the homework for Ms. Kennedy's class? After school, I had a lot of homework that day and wasn't feeling very social, so I decided to just stay in for the night. While I was working on a short story for my American storytelling class, I heard my parents get in from work. I continued typing away when I heard footsteps ascending the staircase. They stopped just outside my bedroom door. What's up? I shouted. Silence. Mom. I waited for a response. Dad? Again, silence. Chills slid down my spine as I remembered the dream from the night before. I sat frozen to my chair until a heavy knock on the door made me jump in my seat. I stared at the door for what felt like hours, paralyzed by fear. After a few minutes, I heard the front door open again, this time accompanied by the voices of my parents. I breathed a sigh of relief. I'm just imagining things, I told myself. I opened my bedroom door so I felt safer, knowing now that my parents were home. With a slight tremble, I resumed writing my short story. Later that night, as I drifted off, the same dream I had had the night before played back to me. Once again, I woke up after seeing myself asleep in my bed, this time shivering and covered in sweat. I jumped out of bed and pulled my blinds shut. I looked at my alarm clock. Around 2 a.m. Suddenly, I heard slow, methodical footsteps ascending the staircase again. Moving quickly, I shoved the mini fridge in my room in front of the bedroom door and got back in bed, cowering underneath my covers as I stared at the doorknob. It slowly began to turn. Go away, go away, go away, go away, I pleaded under my breath. There was the sound of something running at the door and then bang, 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 bang. The door shook one last time. Then silence. I stared at the door until I drifted back into uneasy sleep. The next morning, I was awoken by more heavy banging at my door. I jolted upright. Heather, open this door, shouted my mom. I sighed in relief as I got out of my bed and moved the fridge away from the door. My mom instantly opened it. "Why was your door blocked?" I debated telling her the truth but knew she wouldn't believe me. "I was moving my furniture around last night and forgot to move the fridge back, sorry." My mom looked at me with exasperation. "Okay, but don't leave it in front of your door." "What if there was a fire?" "Sorry, Mom." "Come downstairs for breakfast, Dad made waffles." When I got to school, I immediately met with Chris. "I think something followed us from the circle." "What are you talking about?" Chris replied, "So nothing happened to you last night?" "No, why?" "Something tried to get into my room." "How do you know?" "Just trust me, Chris, fuck. I'm serious about this. Calm down, just tell me what happened." I told Chris everything I'd experienced the previous night. Christ. "Do you think it'll happen again tonight?" "I don't know, probably. We have to do something. We don't even know what this thing is or what it wants. What can we do? Maybe there's some kind of offering we can make. I think the fire from the joint woke it up, so there must be something we can do to maybe calm it down. I don't know, that's what they do in horror movies. This is real life, though. Well, do you have a better idea?" "No, I guess not. We should try throwing some meat and jewelry into the hole after school." "That's oddly specific. What else do demons want?" "Flowers and mixtapes?" I replied sarcastically. "All right, fine, we'll go with meat and jewelry. I'll bring what I can to your house around 5. "Sounds good." That afternoon, I watched as Chris walked up my driveway. "You ready?" I asked him. "Yeah. Are you?" "You don't look so good," Chris replied. "I don't really want to go back there, but I'd rather fix whatever is happening." The two of us followed the marked trees to the circle. "Ugh," Chris exclaimed, holding his nose. "Smells like rotten eggs." "Did it smell like this last time?" I asked. I couldn't remember. Definitely not. I peered over the edge and felt an urge to jump. I stepped back. "All right, let's throw in our offerings." Chris threw some leftover meat he'd had in his fridge into the hole, and I threw in jewelry I didn't wear anymore, some gold, some silver. "Nothing happened, is that it?" Chris asked. "We won't know until tomorrow." I felt a sense of relief, as though a heavy weight had lifted from my shoulders. We went back to my place and played video games until Chris had to go home. I felt uneasy but hopeful as the night came. I hadn't heard anything out of place so far. When I went to bed, I laid there listening to the dark silence, fearing that it would not last. To my surprise, it did. I finally fell asleep and didn't wake up again until morning. The offering must have worked. When I got to school, I approached Chris during our shared period. "Hey man, I think we did it," I exclaimed. "I don't know about that," Chris replied absently. My gut sank. "What do you mean?" "Once I got home last night, my whole house smelled like rotten eggs. I spent like an hour trying to find the source of the smell, but eventually I couldn't even smell it anymore. So I just went to my room and went on Reddit. As I was falling asleep, I heard glass shatter downstairs. I figured it was probably just my cat knocking over a glass or something. But when I got down there, the glass from the front door was broken all over on the living room floor. I couldn't see anyone outside, but I got this awful feeling that I should not go out there." "Where were your parents?" "Date night. They didn't get back until after all this." "Well, what happened next?" "Well, I didn't go outside. I called my parents and told them that someone threw a rock through the front door, and they said they'd deal with it when they got home. I just went to my room and looked at eye bleach and Shibe videos to try to calm myself, but I just couldn't shake the dread. Then there were these heavy footsteps running down the hallway outside my bedroom. My heart was fucking racing. They'd reach the end of the hall, then run the opposite direction until finally something heavy slammed into my door. I was freaking out at this point, especially when I realized I'd left my cell phone downstairs. "Why didn't you call the cops when your door shattered?" "I don't know. I don't always think straight when I'm afraid." "All right, sorry, just tell me the rest." Chris sighed. "Anyways, I heard footsteps above me in the attic, too. Then something started tapping on my window, but I was too afraid to open the curtains. Eventually, I heard my parents' car coming up the driveway and all the sounds suddenly stopped. It took me a few minutes to calm myself down, but I told my parents that I thought someone had broken in and might be hiding in the house. They called the cops, who came by and did a search." "Did they find anything?" "No, but they said they'll station a car outside for a couple nights just to make sure no one comes back." "Well, what should we do?" Chris was silent for a minute. "What if it wants something living?" "No, Chris, I won't do that," I said sternly. "Do what?" "A sacrifice." "Are you serious?" "Well, your fucking jewels and meat didn't do anything." Chris was getting agitated. I understood his fear, but I didn't want to do something violent to appease this thing. Listen, man, I want to stop this as much as you do, but not like this. It doesn't have to be a dog or goat or something. We could just trap a squirrel or rabbit or something and throw it in. I sighed. If you trap them. Then fine, thank you. We'll make this stop. I really hope so, I said. On another note, did you do Ms. Chambers' essay? Ah, fuck. That night I dreamt again, but the nightmare had changed. I was dangling in the pit, clutching a vine. I was filled with dread as I peered into the darkness below. I tried to climb out, but the vine broke. As I fell deep into the abyss, windows started appearing in the dirt and stone that surrounded me. I could see my family, Chris, and windows that showed families and children in vintage clothing. The farther I fell, the more disturbing the images through the windows became. My eyes flooded with tears. I started to see people I knew from school silently weeping blood. I saw my parents lying motionless in the backyard. I saw Chris crying in his bed, his teeth stained with blood. My descent slowed until I landed in a bed, my own bed, with my bedroom forming from out of the darkness. There was a steady tapping at my window, and I slowly got out of bed despite my overwhelming anxiety. I felt like I was walking through water as I moved through my room. As I approached the window, I could see the outline of Chris standing in my yard. My window unlocked itself and gently opened, a cool breeze rolling through. "Chris?" I shouted. He began to laugh. The sound of a crowd of people, not one boy. He sank into the ground as the world around me began to shake. I woke up to find my bed shaking violently. I started screaming and it suddenly stopped. My heart was racing and I barely had time to catch my breath before I heard a light tapping on my window. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I did so, the heavier it became until I heard the glass crack. Then silence. I was not about to look out my window. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Chris's number. He picked up almost immediately. "Are you okay?" "What's up?" Chris said. "More stuff happened. We need to finish this tomorrow." "Did the traps catch anything?" I said between heavy breaths. "I haven't checked yet." "What happened?" I woke up from a nightmare to my bed shaking and something hitting my window. "Were you awake when I called?" "Yeah, some stuff happened here too." I went downstairs to get a glass of water and all the windows and doors in the entire house were wide open. I tried to wake my parents up, but they're out really cold. "What about the cops? Wasn't there one stationed outside?" "They were asleep too. The cops really are useless." "Is everything else okay?" "I've been hearing footsteps throughout the house. I've just been hiding in my room. I'll go to bed when the sun is up again." "I don't blame you. Just be safe." "Will you stay on the phone with me?" "Yeah, sure. I can't sleep anyways." I stayed on the phone with Chris until sunlight poured through my windows. I could hear what sounded like distant whispers outside my window throughout the night, but they disappeared with the dark. The rest of the day went normally, and the two of us met up after school in my backyard. My parents were still at work as I waited outside my house smoking a bowl. After a couple minutes, Chris came around the corner holding two humane traps. One had a large rabbit in it, the other a restless raccoon. My heart sank thinking of what was going to happen to these innocent forest creatures. "Are you ready to end this?" Chris said to me. "More ready than you can imagine. I feel bad about the animals, though." Chris looked at the animals and frowned. "I'm not excited either, but it's the only thing that makes sense anymore." "Come on, let's get to it." The two of us walked through the forest, following the marked trees to the circle. The land around us was silent. In the cages, the animals were going berserk, biting at the cage and making horrible sounds. I felt both emotional anguish and physical dread. As we approached the circle, Chris turned to me. "Does it look bigger than before to you?" I looked at it. I wasn't sure, but it definitely seemed larger. "Yeah, it kind of does look bigger." "All right. Do you want to throw them in?" Chris asked me, lifting up the cages. "I really don't. I'll cry if I do it." "Fuck." "Okay, I'll do it." Chris walked over to the edge of the circle and peered inside, taking a deep breath. "Okay." I watched as Chris threw the panicking animals into the abyss, the sounds of their whimpers and cries going silent as the circle swallowed them. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve. "Is that it? Can we go now?" "Let's hope this works." "Yeah, let's go back and smoke a bowl. I need to relax right now." As night fell, we parted ways. The events of the last few days, ever since we had stumbled across the circle, had been weirder and more stressful than anything I'd experienced before. I just hoped this would be the end of things. Since it was Friday night, I stayed up really late. I was still anxious to sleep. By 1 a.m., my parents had gone to bed and nothing had happened yet. I was beginning to feel like things had worked. I checked my phone. There were no notifications from Chris. I decided to call him just to check up on him. All I got was his voicemail. He's just asleep, I thought. I continued to play video games until I heard shouting outside my window. I recognized Chris's voice. I immediately ran to my window and opened it. There he was, standing in the moonlit backyard, still in pajamas and shaking. "Dude, what are you doing here? Did something happen?" I yelled. We have to go to the circle. Now. Things have gotten worse." Chris huffed. "What are you talking about? What happened?" "Ugh." Chris sighed angrily and started walking towards the forest without a flashlight. "Fuck," I said to myself as I put on a pair of pants and grabbed a flashlight. I also grabbed a knife just in case. I went downstairs, careful not to wake my parents, and went to the back door. Chris was gone. I was scared, but I wasn't about to let my best friend go to the circle alone. It occurred to me that this might be a trick, an inhuman force appearing as Chris. This was a common twist in horror stories. Even so, I wasn't going to risk leaving Chris alone in the woods without a flashlight. I opened the door, took a deep breath, and started towards the tree line. There was a stagnant mist hanging in the forest as I followed the marked trees, calling out Chris's name. I gripped the knife tight in my left hand as I carefully made my way through the woods. Eventually, I came to the circle, and it was wider than before. It even seemed to be growing before my eyes. There was a loud groan as a tree at the edge lost its grip on the earth and tumbled in, disappearing silently into the abyss. "Heather," I heard Chris say behind me. "Chris!" I shouted as I turned around. He was standing with a slouch just a couple feet away from me. "What happened, man? Why are we here?" "I don't know." "I don't know, but it's worse now." "It's worse, Heather." "Chris, calm down. Talk to me." "No!" Chris shouted. He pushed me and I fell down. I looked behind me. The hole was coming closer. It was hungry. "Chris, what the fuck?" I shouted as I stood up. He grunted and lunged at me. I dodged him and he stumbled, nearly falling into the expanding abyss. "I have to, Heather. It's the only way." He lunged at me again and successfully knocked me against a tree, my head colliding with the bark. I dropped everything in my hands as I hit the tree. He shoved me harder against the bark as I tried to punch and push him away, but he wasn't budging. "I'm sorry, Chris," I shouted as I brought my left leg up between his knees. He instantly keeled over as I grabbed the knife from beside the tree. "Please calm down and tell me what happened," I said, panting. "I don't want to have to defend myself again." Chris moaned in pain and looked up at me before trying to lunge at me again. I sidestepped him and slashed clumsily with the knife. I think it tore his shirt, but everything was happening so fast. I quickly moved away so that I wasn't facing the growing hole behind me and held up the knife. "Chris, please, stop this," Chris cried out and came at me again. I swung the knife frantically as he approached me, landing one swipe on his torso. He put his hand to his chest, feeling the warm blood seep between his fingers. He looked at me with a look of anger I had never seen before. I was afraid before this, but now I truly feared for my life. "Please, Chris, I'm not playing." I tried to step back, but he lunged at me again. I raised the knife and stabbed at him, aiming for somewhere that wouldn't kill him. He grunted as the blade of my knife sank into his right shoulder. He took a step backward and looked me in my eyes. "Heather." He stumbled back once more and caught his foot on a stone by the edge of the circle. "Chris, no." I sprang forward and tried to grab at him as he fell backwards, but I was too late. I watched in terror as he disappeared into the abyss, screaming as he fell. The ground quaked as the hole stopped growing. I collapsed to the ground and cried there for several minutes, the fear replaced with anguish. "Chris," "Oh," I choked. I had killed my best friend. Even though it was in self-defense, I could not help but blame myself for what had happened. I wanted to wake up, but this wasn't a dream. It was a living nightmare. Too distraught to comprehend what had just occurred, I grabbed my flashlight and stumbled back home through the mist. I woke my parents up as soon as I got home and told them everything. They were skeptical, but my dad agreed to follow me out to the woods after seeing how shaken I really was. The mist was gone, and I lead him along the marked trees until we reached the end. He sighed. "Heather, there's nothing here. It was just a dream." My dad sighed. I stared in absolute disbelief at the solid ground before me. This was where the circle had been. I could see the rock that Chris had tripped on, the disturbed soil where a tree had fallen into nothingness. I propped myself against a tree, overcome with nausea. "Honey, are you okay?" my dad asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. It must have been a dream after all. I said I didn't believe it. Everything I had just experienced seemed so real. The circle, the knife, the blood, Chris's screams, all seared into my brain. But I didn't want to try to rationalize it right then. We returned home and I went to bed, although I never went to sleep. I kept trying to call Chris throughout the night and the following days, but he never answered. Neither would his parents when I called his house. I knocked on their door, but no one seemed to be home. The following Monday, Chris didn't show up to school. Same with Tuesday. And Wednesday, the police searched his house and found both of his parents dead in some sort of bloodbath. The cops theorized that Chris had murdered his parents and ran away to avoid arrest. But I knew the truth. Chris was dead. I was the only one who knew what had really happened to him, but what could I say? People would just think I was crazy, or that I was trying to cover for my friend. The circle was gone. So was my best friend, but the memories would never fade, nor the constant struggle to come to terms with what had happened and why. You can be assured of one thing, though. I haven't spent a day in the woods since.